I think we're gonna get started. Great to see everyone back after such a sunny lunch hour. We weren't sure how many people from this morning would have taken off to enjoy the sights of Toronto, but thank you for coming in. What we have today is a very interactive experience here, session with you guys, where we have 4 esteemed panelists that have all done different things at their institution in terms of optimizing learning experiences through the addition of technology. They're going to speak to their successes, but also to some of the obstacles they had to overcome in implementing various forms of technology. I was talking at the break that I asked these lovely Generation Zs what they want to be when they grow up, and I was informed doctor and also doctor teacher. Well, you guys are in luck today because all 4 panelists are both doctors and teachers. 4 of our panelists are from the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College, which is located here in Toronto, and 1 is from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. So you have a lot of brains in this room and a lot of suits too. So, anyways, we will begin. I'm going to introduce that's the panel, and then we're going to leave all the questions to the end. I'm going to be very strict with the time. We're going to take 5 minutes maximum each to explain what they did at their institutions, so that we're left with 10 minutes for questions and interaction at the end. So I'll start with introducing my good friend, Dr. David Starmer, who is the education coordinator for CMCC's Simulation Lab and is a past instructor in departments of clinical diagnosis, clinical education, chiropractic therapeutics at the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. His primary instructional roles are teaching technique, specifically medical simulation, where he's won multiple awards at basically every conference he attends. Dr. Starmer has his master's degree in health studies, as well as completing a program in simulation technology at Sim1. He's an active researcher in spinal manipulation training, with many publications under his name. So, good friend of mine, Dr. David Starmer.
Thanks, Scott. Everyone got confused with up or down, so let's see how this goes. Yeah, I got it wrong. So I wanted to talk today about trying to use technology to eliminate lectures and get students out of the classroom to make more efficient use of their time and engage more in the practical aspects of learning. Really the goals that drive this is I'm in a program where there at one point was 4,400 hours. And we used to have this culture where the more hours that are in your program, the better your students are when they graduate, which if you have 8 hours of lecture in one day, I think you leave dumber than if you had 2 hours of lecture on that day. So we really wanted to, number 1, avoid passive learning environments, engage students in meaningful, enjoyable learning activities rather than just having low student satisfaction, which is going to feed poor engagement, and having ineffective learning environments where you're just throwing too much information that they could absorb. And in healthcare, it's really important that we create independent learners, because the learning doesn't stop the day you graduate. I don't care what healthcare profession you're in, you're never that good. You need to constantly learn and practice. So we need the students to struggle and be able to problem solve on their own. So that was really the focus that was driving our changes. So what we tried is, yeah, go ahead. What we tried is starting to use Articulate Storyline to try and create a very engaging, interactive platform for our students to use instead of lectures. Some of the core principles that we wanted to do is make something that was self-paced, so the students can go through it at their own level of learning and understanding. We wanted to make sure it was rich with animations, text, videos, audio. We wanted to engage them and all the different learners and their preferences. And we wanted to make sure it's interactive. I've done online modules where I just hit play and 40 minutes later it's over and I say thank you, complete. We wanted to make sure that the learners were engaged and having to click and interact with what was happening on the screen, and we thought it was important to make it nonlinear. So you don't have to go from slide 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to get to 5. It's here are the topics we want to cover, and you can go to any topic in any order that you want, spend as much or as little time as you want, go back if you need anything refreshed. And we wanted to make sure it's rich with feedback. So when they're interacting and even having some cases to work through, whether the answer was right or wrong, it's not about win or lose, it's about win or learn. So we wanted feedback given back to them. So I'm trying to keep this in 5 minutes, so I'm not going to have a chance to really show you the module, but this is the general home screen that they would see. And it was an applied science course where we're trying to get our students to understand how to use therapeutic modalities that you would find in a chiropractor or physiotherapist's office, something like ultrasound, laser, or an electrical stimulation device. And there's the core things, the modules, the sections of the course, so we made sure all our modules were the same. And they would just have to click and go to whatever one that they wanted to. Within each of these sections, there would be a series of information, rich video, text, audio, and there would be cases at the end where they would have to apply that knowledge. So for something like precautions and indications, they would get a brief history and physical and say, is it safe to proceed using this device that we're talking about? If it is or isn't, why? When we get to constructing care, now that we're going to choose this, can you please program the machine? And the nicest thing with using something like our articulate storyline, sorry, wrong way again, is I could actually animate, here's an electrical stimulation machine, and I could actually make the buttons interactive. So when the student clicks on the file here, the case information pops up, so they make their decisions based on. They'll say, I'm ready to answer, they'll go back to this. They would actually have to click on the buttons, arrows, the different hotspots to actually program the machine, so they would get an understanding of how that machine works. And then they would hit submit and get their feedback. So the outcomes of using something like this, we had enhanced student engagement. Students wouldn't attend lectures, but when you put this material up online, they would actually play with this before the exam. Otherwise, they would just read textbooks, other students' notes, and we knew that the lecture weren't being that effective. We had increased student satisfaction. We had increased student performance. Class average went from 79% up to 85% using a same case-based written exam format. So I was happy to see that this was being more effective, and we had reduced lecture hours, which is overall, if we can get the rest of the curriculum on board, going to lead to great outcomes. And students like this, and some people involved with this got some faculty awards from it. So it was great success. Context is everything, though. So you may or may not be in an applied health science course. You may be in a course with rich in content or rich in language. I just wanted to share that using articulate storyline, I have some capacity to help other faculty and talk specifically about that system, or even just in design, and compare and contrast my learners versus your learners. Would it work in your environment? I really wanted to say that online learning can fail miserably or it can succeed, and I think a big part of that is the success in creating something that promotes learner responsibility, participation, and really makes it interactive. So I am going to leave it there and pass it over to someone else.
Thank you. And yeah, I guess we can do the applause as we go along, and keeping it to 5 minutes as a thank you as well. So our next presenter is Dr. Lester, another member of the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. So he works as the rehabilitation coordinator as well as an instructor for CMCC's undergrad. His primary instructional roles are as an instructor of the rehab courses in the preclinical years, and as well as a simulation educator at CMCC. He's been recognized, much like Dave, his colleague, with many awards at various conferences, and is trained in simulation education as well. At ACRAC last year, which is in the chiropractic world, our pinnacle of research conferences, he was awarded a distinction at that conference. So, Dr. Lester.
You did the same thing.
I'm going to flip it upside down. So, thank you for having me today, guys. We're going to be talking about how we add simulation or add technology to increase psychomotor skill learning, okay, or enhance motor skills. So we wanted, much like Dave, want to outline what is our goals. So what did we want to achieve by adding education or simulation education into motor skills, whether that is high fidelity mannequins, force plates into chiropractic tables, or other means of simulation or technology into the classroom. what were the outcomes, and application is how we used it to assess students. Okay. So we wanted to go through, we want to be world-class educators, especially education in the chiropractic realm or manual skills. So we wanted to make sure that these students were able to acquire knowledge at a certain rate. We come in the old days, we used to teach students, well, you're moving too fast, you're moving too slow. Usually too fast is not usually the problem, but moving too slow. You're not using enough force with your adjustment. Well, that's all of us just looking at it and saying, that's what we perceive. Now with the addition of force plates in our chiropractic tables, we can have the students press on these tables. We can see a transmitted load through a mannequin or a human participant, and then we can give them relative feedback. We can say, this was not enough force, it was too slow, and now we have numbers to back that up. Okay? Going through and optimizing that feedback, we use different things. We have video recordings to optimize the feedback. So giving an example is Coach's Eye. It's I believe it's $6. It's an app that you can put on your iPhone or tablet. You can have the student perform the adjustment. You can have them come in, adjust the mannequin, adjust their peer, bring them over, show them, I perceive this to be too slow. I perceive that you weren't doing enough of this segment of the adjustment to achieve its appropriate response. So we can have them feedback, they can watch themselves, they can come in, do it slow motion. We can tap on the screen and add different force vectors or line of drive, whichever we want to teach the student as to their deficiency that we perceived. Maybe it wasn't deficient, maybe it was a great job and we said, this was a beautiful attempt at an adjustment, this is what we want to see. That's one style of increasing the quality of our practice with the students trying to learn these motor skills. So again, some of the things we wanted, we tried the Coach's Eye. Like I think again, $6 app. $6 app, put it on your electronic device. You're able to watch your students. Any people in here that have motor skill learning as part of their curriculum? Okay, so the dental hygiene? Dental assisting group. So Coach's Eye, here's your manual feedback. FSTT is a technology developed by the Chiropractic College, and that's our force tables in the force plates in the chiropractic table. A nice, easy way to give numerical feedback versus some qualitative feedback that may not be understood. And then simulation technology, we have high fidelity mannequins from Gomard, so we do medical emergencies in the classroom. So we teach these medical emergencies to chiropractic students because maybe in a chiropractor's office you might have somebody with a diabetic coma. They might have gone for a run, they come in, they're a little hot, exhausted, they didn't take their insulin or they didn't have any sugar, something happens. How do you respond? How do you manage the office? So it's a safe way to have them experience this instead of letting them go out into the world and they experience this firsthand for the first time. So now we can have these mannequins, we can change their heart rate, we can change their pupils, they can dilate, they can constrict. So this technology is in our classrooms. We run the students through these scenarios and see how they then perform. If they've performed poorly, that's no big deal. We don't pass judgment. If they perform like they're all-star EMTs or medical doctors, great. But what happens, we get to go in, we get to fix everything. They get feedback prior to being fixed, essentially. They go in for second try, and they come out with retaining that knowledge. And there's been research studies from the Chiropractic College to show we do a study today, or we do a test today, 6 months later we can take somebody that's not the doctor, or wasn't in that doctor role, it could have been the receptionist role, and 6 months later that receptionist will step in and perform just as well as the doctor. So that learning environment is very rich for the students. I went backwards against my thing here. So here's a video. 1 minute, they're gonna have to pull me off the stage. So here's our simulation lab at CMCC, and this was our mannequin challenge that we went in, and what you're seeing at the back, here's our mannequins. I didn't know we had a soundtrack to this is great. So you see students coming in, looking at videos of themselves performing adjustments or the chiropractors that they're watching. Our task trainer, here's our high fidelity mannequin. Students are performing CPR, learning different skills. You see Dr. Starmer in the background there. He's educating somebody on one of our force plate tables. Starmer is on the Hall of Fame. One of our colleagues is not. So here's Dr. Starmer and myself educating people on the force plate tables at CMCC. students can come in and practice adjustments on mannequins before they get out in the real world. Or just go. I just want to stop the soundtrack. It wasn't as good as I thought. So, you like the soundtrack? It was good. So, what we wanted to do, we wanted student engagement and satisfaction. So in our simulation lab with these force tables, we have 700 students at any given time that are in the preclinical years. So that's years 1 to 3. They came in, we had 15,000 visits last year to the simulation lab to practice adjustments. So that's 15,000 more interactions than they would have had prior to us having that simulation lab. We have research, I don't want to take up too much time because he's going to yank me off the stage. We have research that will show all of these things. Student satisfaction, short-term and long-term retention gains, and then faculty faculty research that has been also multi-institutional collaborations with other chiropractic colleges or with other health disciplines. And so application, just getting to know your technology. Are there things that are limiting factors? Of course, the GOMARD mannequins and the force plate tables are expensive, so grants are always necessary, or a nice donation. But those lower end prices, $6 app. You can put on a $6 app and help visualize to your student the performance they used. And then last, here's my name and some the research that you guys may want to have at a later date. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's all right. I knew in advance that I'd have to be getting the hook out for Steve because he's done so much great work with using apps, using simulation, using force plates at our school that 5 minutes really isn't justice. Our next speaker today is Dr. Shihab El-Hashimi, Associate Professor and Associate Dean of Academic Delivery at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto. He's completed his undergrad education at Lakehead, medical education at Cairo University, naturopathic education and residency at CCNM. Is currently completing a specialization in a master's education. He's done a lot of great work at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, and we're privileged to have him today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've all done it.
Other way. Sure.
This is Thomas remote
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to present to you a simple technology that we've adopted this year. So we don't have outcomes yet, but everybody's happy with it, except faculty, and I'll tell you why. So we're similar to CMCC. We're a private degree granting. We grant the degree of naturopathic doctor, and it's 4,000 hours, and we think that staying in class is a good thing. And of course, research is telling us that's not really the case. From a student experience, they go through cycles. So we go through terms. In the midterm, they have about, it depends on what year they are in, they have about 8 to 13 high-stake exams, we call it, every maybe 2 months. So they go through these cycles of high stress and then low stress, high stress and then low stress. We got breakdown, we got people that can't handle it. So we tried something. We changed our policy a little bit, and we encourage students to reschedule exams. Take the exam when you want, right? Of course, there's issues of academic integrity and can they cheat and all this stuff. So we changed the policy first, and then we panicked and we figured, well, how are we gonna do this? We sat down with our faculty. We interviewed maybe everybody that does exam kind of delivery. We kind of met with them and we saw what they can offer. Our standards were quite high, so we wanted any rescheduled exam, whenever, wherever you take it, is equivalent in outcome, rigor, validity, and reliability. An easy interface, exams as an educational tool. So we wanted, instead of our old model where you get a score, we wanted to tell you, if you got something wrong, we got to tell you what was right and why and whatever. So every encounter you get better. So we use something called yardstick measure. Yardstick is not an educational tool till we got to them. It was registration and certification tool. So it's used for bar exams. It's used for a jurisdictional certification. Maybe some of you already have taken some of those exams. Flight instructor, pilot licensing stuff. So it's a very rigorous testing tool. We partnered with them and we created a whole bunch of stuff. So we wrote code and whatever. So basically, we use it to do what we call algorithmic exam creation. So From a student perspective, student can sign up at any time. We have a test center that they can take in. Our test center is small, so it has only 6 stations, but there's 3 sits every day. So you can multiply. We're open every day in the week. You can come in the weekend. You can come anytime. And it's a fairly, we tape sound, we tape video, there's whatever. Exam banks have to be large to do something like this. So if you have an exam that is about 50 items, then your exam bank would have to be at least 150, but it's not that simple. It would have to be 3 times per outcome. So if you have 17 outcomes, then you multiply that. So sometimes it's a lot more than 3 times. So our exam banks are thousands of items. So how do you build that? You pay for it. So it costs. So we, just maybe to come back a little bit, every rescheduled exam is unique. And it's unique in selection. So the algorithm is selecting it on the spot. The faculty doesn't know what's going to be selected. The student doesn't either. If 2 students are next to each other, they're not going to see the same question at the same time. They may never even see the same question on the same exam. But they'll see the same outcomes. Once the student is done, the faculty still reviews the results. So if an item is no longer valid, if an item wasn't reliable, if research kind of went against something when they wrote the item, they can still modify the result. Once this is done, then it goes to our LMS, which is Moodle, for a gradebook, and then from Moodle it goes to SonusWeb, which is our registrar system. So this is kind of how it works. How we do it. So we build it based on logical clusters, outcomes. Is it one? Okay. We work with faculty to devise an organizational structure. So we hired what we call exam experts. So those are people that are taught the technology side and taught pedagogy. So they know how to work with faculty. Very few of our faculty are really comfortable with the idea of assessment rubrics and outcomes as a design. So of course they would need a little bit of help. And they can write items continuously. Just there's a cycle. So they can write items, but the items have to go through peer review, they have to go through technical review, and when they're tagged as operational, then they can appear on an exam. The system also handles our administration end, so if there's a cost associated with an exam, if there's a practical component with an examination, then it kind of reviews that. If there's a short answer component, then of course the faculty will have to do that the regular way. Just you get an email and you will mark it, and then the mark goes back. The platform is used for images, lab reports. We use it a lot with videos and things that we couldn't use in our regular exams. So our regular exams got better. Caveats. This is time consuming to build an exam. If you're a faculty member and I come to you and I say I need 3 times, but it's really 5 times, this is a lot of work and you have to pay me for it and support me, and there's a lot of stuff. And relinquishing control to a machine is kind of hard to faculty, so that's kind of an issue. Algorithms have fail-safes that can kick in anytime and stop an exam, and we have to be ready to kind of adapt to that. And the technology is not cheap. We pay a yearly access fee, and every time an exam is used, we pay a small fee. And I will turn it over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our institutions are actually very close together, so our students do interact a lot. Now we're getting requests at CMCC to get these pieces of technology because they want to write exams at 10 at night or on Sundays or whenever. It really does add a whole other dimension. So, last presenter today, and then we'll open it up for questions for everybody, is Dr. Aaron Tettelbaum. He's a lecturer and course coordinator at CMCC in systems pathology. He's obtained his MD from Russia back in 1990 and has been practicing as a general surgeon, pathologist, combining his clinical appointment to teaching at the Faculty of Medicine and Nursing. After immigrating to Canada, he got his master's degree. He's wicked smart and does a great job at our school. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe I shouldn't even present, just appear and go. You would appreciate my presence. However, it's not only to be a last on today's agenda. It's actually, I know how students talk to me, and I'm probably the most hated professor in the college for a simple reason, because I have to teach the entire medical sciences. My course, that's the 3rd year course in systems pathology, which requires lots of thinking, lots of interaction, and lots of previous knowledge. So basically, my course has to combine normal anatomy, normal physiology, laboratory science, plus put it all in pathological perspective. And clearly, the person who graduates with a doctoral degree is supposed to know what's going on inside the human body. Well, we can touch the person either with the hands or with the knife and say, yes, we treat it, but we have to understand the processes going on. And there's a main challenge for me as a new instructor at the college several years ago, that I'm coming from a medical background. It's slightly different from chiropractic perspective, number one. Number two, the person who was teaching the course before, he left absolutely nothing, empty LMS. And when I came in, the only thing I had the syllabus. And I got my appointment probably last week of August. And I've been told that your first lecture is August 28, 8 o'clock in the morning, Monday. And I've been designing my entire course on the fly from the very scratch. Plus, you have to understand a different thing, and probably we are all approximately the same age, that we all came through a very didactic, very classical educational system. So you have a professor at the podium, and everyone who is in the audience, 200, 300, whatever people, you have their praying on him, because that's the only God exists in the room. And whatever you say has to be taken without any discussions. North American culture and our students' culture, not only the cultural differences, but also generational differences, they are different. They question you, they assess you, they give you feedback, and I never have bravery to read my reviews without a previous visit to LCBO. You're literally gonna cry reading what they write.
Yeah.
Some of them are actually very pragmatic and very influential, and you learn from what they say. Some of them are just being simply abusive. However, you have to get the message across. You have to get the message across. You have to teach people how to see pathological condition without actually open up. Yes, it's easy to work. You know who the smartest doctor in the hospital? Pathologist. Because you open up and you see right away everything what's in there. And there's no harm anymore. Whatever is harm happen in the world. You just judge. But however, in a clinical setting, especially ambulatory clinical setting, you have to interpret clinical science, laboratory workout, and imaging in a way that people would understand what's going on. So they are not doing adjustments because of the pain, and that pain might be caused by metastatic lesion in the vertebra. That actually takes a lot. And what also happens, if you're gonna look at the classical representation of the Bloom's taxonomy, so when we go into my course, they have to employ everything. They have to employ their knowledge they get in the first and the second year. They have to comprehend what's going on, what's that muscle doing, and how it hurts when that muscle is dysfunctional or the nerve is being severed by the knife in the bar. Or also they have to apply that knowledge to the clinical case, and all of the exams in our course is actually clinically based cases. And then you have to analyze that. That's where the problem comes. Once you go into the higher level of thinking, clearly we are not going into evaluation and synthesis. We assume that they would be fully prepared for the fourth year, and they would be fully prepared for the clinical practice when they would be able to put all of the puzzles together and apply them on their patients. That is a huge challenge. The course used to be very didactical, 57 hours of me. Can you imagine you watching me 57 hours talking about extremely difficult stuff? You're gonna hate me. Plus I throw at you 4 exams at the beginning, 2 hours length, and then I ask you questions, you have no idea what I'm asking. How to improve that? It's a long way, and we're still going through evolutionary process. What we try to do first, quite often, and there's another challenge what I faced, note services. When you have people in your room actually typing on their computers, not because they're so eager to know what you talk about, they're actually eager to make note services. They type everything what you say below the slide, then they print those notes in numerous copies without even asking you copyright permission, and they distribute those notes. And once they leave these notes after the exam, sometimes I read them, it's not even near what I said in my lecture. For a simple reason, we all have different backgrounds, we all take in different notes. If you have similar backgrounds as mine, probably you would be putting only notes what you don't know, what you have to pay attention to. The person without any previous background would type complete nonsense. Sometimes people blame my accent, even though it's not probably the problem with the accent, it's probably a problem with the comprehension. However, the note services might be completely different from the actual fact. And then what we decide to do, and we start in September. So basically what happens, I open my laptop, I capture the screen I have behind me, and then I record every word in the classroom I have. And then I convert that and I use my simple technology. It's available. You can try Camtasia by TextMate. It records your screen. If you have multiple screens, you choose whichever screen you need. It records your audio. Then you convert it into MP4 format, and that is available on any platform existing right now anywhere. It might be Windows, it might be Mac, it might be handheld devices. And then they have no arguments anymore that I said this and that. Also, it's extremely helpful for you if you draw. If you have a touch screen and if you do different kind of drawing during the lecture, that records as well. Then once you write your exams, you always can go back and you can always see what happens. We are human beings, we make mistakes. Not only mistakes, factual mistakes. It's clearly very difficult for me to mix up the brain and the liver. However, you realize that you should be talking about these things a little bit more or in a different direction, or you have to emphasize a different content. That's number one. Number two, if there's any arguments during the exam review or anything, you haven't said that, go there. I actually had said that. It's extremely interesting for yourself to listen to yourself, even though when you listen to your own voice, it's extremely weird to listen. Mm-hmm. However, it trains you what to say and how to say that. There's a couple of things we didn't like, and we still have some kind of objections about it. Number one, class attendance. I have my class Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Tell me, who would volunteer for my class Monday morning at 8 o'clock? Number one. However, I noticed one simple thing. Whoever is coming, they're still coming. Whoever doesn't come, what can I do, really? There's some possibilities that they're gonna skip my class time and then they're gonna cram everything a few days before the exam. Well, again, it's probably their own time management approach. And also we faced several technical issues. So Wi-Fi connectivities, audio disturbances. Sometimes you have unpleasant echo. They're all kind of solvable problems, and we still can solve them later on. Thank you.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you for the introduction. Actually, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for George Brown to give me this opportunity. My name is Jane Ji, president of Spring Bay Studio, and I really appreciate that you take the time that we can have a conversation about how to use building virtual biodomes to teach about biodiversity. So before I start, I'd like to talk a little bit about ourselves. We actually dedicated to all our IPs to educate the kids about the beauty of the natural world around them. And we want to create fun educational game that the kids can have fun with, can explore, and can learn in. We want to create virtual biology labs that the kids can play and can also discover the beautiful of the biodiversity that in any ecosystems. So we realized as the power of the interactive media for many subjects, such as biology or biodiversity, it does have the advantage that we can create a safe virtual environment for the kids to learn, to interact with, and to do experiment with, even though this experiment is in the quotes. But for any science, that will be the fundamental thing for the kids to get a deep understanding of the concept that we want them to learn. So in 2014, our really give us the idea, it really give us the chance that our idea come to life. In that year, we released the IABL wetland, and we're very fortunate that got a lot of great feedbacks and a recognition from the teachers and parents community. So it won 5 awards, including the Best Learning and Teaching app from the American Association of School Librarians, and also won the Best Learning apps from Common Sense Education and some others from the parents' organizations. So what is the IABL theory? Like I mentioned, our dream is to create a virtual biology lab. We want the kids to be able to create something that represents the beautiful biodiversity that actually surrounds them. So with this, the key point for the game, first of all, is creating a virtual biodome. So how do we do that? We will come to later. I will show you how the game looks like. And also in the game we covered for the IABL wetland, we covered 54 different wetland species covered from 8 categories. And the kids can learn 3 different kind of ecosystems for the wetland, from the saltwater marsh, freshwater marsh, to the mangrove swamps. Then another thing is, the second point for this game is about experiment. So what is the advantage that we can take off for the technologies is that in the game, we can see a lot of the simulation games actually are there in the marketplace. But what we try to do is that we want to create a simulation that the kids can have fun with the biodome that they created. So what the kids can do is that they can change the number of any species that they already learned, and then see how the entire ecosystem react to their changes in a very interactive diagram that they can understand each step on the way, because we know this can be a very complicated reaction. So a third thing I think using a lot of the games is about the reward. The kids want to be encouraged in their exploration or discovery. So we also had a lot of badges to encourage the kids to do more experiment. We have actually 3 badges for that. And I think just come quickly to the other side, from the teacher side. We're very fortunate that there are many schools in the States are using our games. So a lot of the teachers, they post their reviews for this game, and then they identified how the game actually aligned with the science standard that they're using in the US. So this is just a kind of like a snapshot of what they posted online. If you're interested, I will be more than happy to share those information with you. And also I think another thing is, for the Canadian side, we do have the lesson plan actually developed by the Ontario teachers who are using our games. So I know in Canada, some regions have different regional standards, and some has the national ones. So if you're interested in piloting the program, the games in your school, or in helping us to align, our game with the curriculum that you're using, we'd love to talk to you. So that's quickly the thing. And another thing I would like to also mention is the game has been released. The first release was in 2014, but then we did a lot of iterations, and all those iterations actually are based on the feedback we got from the teachers. So we dedicated a version called the Wetland School Edition, just to honor the feedback that we got from the teachers, and we will continue to do so for the rest of our games, because really we want to create a useful tool for the teachers, so you can use it to engage your students in the classroom. So quickly, before I jump into the game, I know the talks are boring. So this is the IABL Ocean game that we just launched last month, and it has been featured by Apple twice. So what's new to IABL wetland? In terms of the building the ecosystems, they're the similar concept, but in the ocean game, we're more focusing on the oceanic ecosystems. We covered 4 different ecosystems in ocean, from the coral reef, the tide pool, to the kelp bed, and open sea. So when I say the ecosystem, you will see the species actually kids can learn from those living in those ecosystems has been identified to be the representative species by our science advisors. So there can give the kids quite a good representative of the biodiversities in those ecosystems. And then, yeah, there are also more species in the iBiome ocean. We had 62 different species coming from 11 different categories. That's give a sense of the biodiversity in those games. What's completely new in the iBiome ocean game is that we add ecology part. Because we all know, it seems not. Maybe I touched something.
Oh, I think the battery's dead.
Oh. Thank you. Yeah, I think, like for the ecology side, a lot of the teachers actually, as adults, we know what's going on in the world. So the question is really for our game, which is targeted for grade 3 to grade 7, what will be appropriate for that age group? So we thought, first of all, from their understanding or their knowledge perspective, perhaps we would like to talk something that they can associate it with. And then also, I think we want to focus on the solutions. So even though we identify we talk about the issues, the challenges the sea ocean, the sea creatures are facing, but we are more talk about how everybody can be part of the solution. So that's our take, and I'd love to have a conversation with you to see your impact, your feedback on that. So why everybody, or how everybody can help. In the iBiome Ocean game, we identified 8 different things that kids can associate with, such as cars, ACs, water bottles, and etc. We try to touch upon 3 challenges that oceans are facing right now. First would be the plastic pollution, and the second would be the ocean acidity, and also we touch upon on the overfishing as well. So you will see in a second, like not only the kids can build, we ask them to build those kind of things they can associate with, and then once they introduce the pollution part or our side effect for the technology will comes in the game. So the point is really here is try to spark the kids to be care about the virtual environment they created. Once they see the plastic litter, for example, in their virtual environment, they will naturally want to get rid of them. That's really is the drive for why we care about this issue. So that's our take, and I'd love to hear your thought on that. So we talk about how everyone can be part of the solution, everything suggested in this game that the kids can do. Like for example, in terms of like the driving of the CO2 emission, perhaps if they live close enough, maybe they can walk to schools, or maybe they can bike to schools if it's safe. So there's very simple thing, but very practical for every kid to do. So that's really is the new part about the iBiome ocean. So I think right now probably you are eager to see how the game look like, and I will just launch the game right now, and let's play a few levels so we will know more about this game.
planet warms up, it is the ocean that gets most of the extra energy. The problem is, when the ocean is too warm, the plants and animals that live within it must adapt or die. The challenge is big, but we can all do something to help. I'm writing a book, Oceans and Us. There are so many things to talk about. Can you tell me what you would like to know?
Yeah, that's the opening for the game. So given an overall what the game's about and give some hint, about the Ocean and Us story. So as you see in the main map, the kids at the beginning, they can start from any one of the 4 ecosystem and start building it. Once they start, they basically have a kind of an empty space, and they need to introduce species 1 or 2 at a time to their Bible in order to build up the virtual ecosystems gradually. So we kind of in the middle of the open sea, where we already have some species.
The largest species of Pacific salmon, the largest Chinook salmon on record, weigh 126 pounds, which is around 56 kilograms. Ask your parents how heavy you are, and imagine the size of such a big fish.
So this is the part we call the crazy web. This is, I think, when we observe the kids to play, we notice that they like to lend their little hands on the things by touching them, manipulate them, plating them, sometimes even destroying them. So that's to give us the inspiration for this gameplay, is we want to create something very intuitive and also very engaging, where on the iPad or on the online, they can just drag and the species to the spot. Where you see on the screen, there are a few spots with labels on them, and those represent the different kind of ecological roles in this given scenario. We also have some icons floating around. Those represent the different species that are given in this case together, and we ask the kids to figure out which species is playing what ecological roles. So they drag the species to the spot. If they does not belong there or does not play that role, you will notice there something pops up. That's explained to the kids why it doesn't play that role. And then just by trial and error, the kids will figure out, what is playing what role, and then gradually you will see if the things align to the role that they play, and they are food chain relationship, you will see the red arrow. That basically represent the energy flow. So gradually they will have everything settled in this kind of a puzzle-like gameplay. And afterwards, notice there's a dancing plus sign there. So we notice kids have different kind of play styles. Some like to rush to the end to build all the ecosystem. Some like to read everything, to get every piece, in this game. So that's really trying to encourage them.
Unfortunately, been declining in recent years, mainly due to overfishing. Because of this, you should always look for sustainably harvested salmon at the grocery store.
And also this part I would like to highlight, this is one of the features recommended by the teacher, to see a neat diagram, perhaps just add a little pose when the kids are playing all the sessions. So that's how now the kids know something about the salmon and and then they also unlock the real picture, which is also again another feature recommended by teachers. So now we introduce the salmons. And I like to show you, now you see those CO2, that's the littering part. The kids naturally will like to click on that, to get rid of that. And that's actually introduce them for the building part, where they already build the car and they can actually improve it. So that's how they can get rid of those kind of litters in their virtual environment, but also on the other hand, help them to know there are something that they can help. So I will just play a few more levels.
Strong swimmer, a thick layer of blubber, which is ideal for life in cold water.
I'd like to show you, I know I need to wrap up quickly, so
Blue whales are the largest animals on the planet. up to 98 feet or 30 meters long. The heart alone can weigh as much as a car.
Now you see the progress on the part. So now we have a solution. This means the kids unlocked a story piece about ocean and us. So let's take a look.
Turn off the engine when they wait to pick you up. This way we can save the gas for driving. Walk to school if you live close enough. Or maybe ride your bike to places close to you. Taking the car less saves gas and gives your body exercise.
Yeah, that's the story part, and then for the experiment part is really is in this feature called add species to the dome. So what we want the kids to do, they can change the number of any species that they unlock, and say in this case I increase the number of squid, and I want to see what will be the impact. Because as we all know, this could be very complicated, and for their age group, we try to simplify the diagram so they can understand. We will show what they changed and what are the direct impact caused by the food chain relationship that's associated with the squid. And the third one would be further down the road, what actually more changes because of the secondary change. At this point, kids can decide whether they would like to apply their test result to the dome or not. So I guess that's the game part. And I think the last thing maybe I would like to mention before I finish the presentation would be the lessons plans. We do have a form here. We'd like to offer the free trial version if you are interested in our game, or you can have a test, just to have a hand-on experience yourself. We're in the booth just outside of this auditorium, this room, and there are other vendors as well. So feel free to sign up for those forms, and our game is available for online and also for the iOS tablets. That's all. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to chat today. Before I get started, I wanted to get a sense of who's in the room, because I know there's a range of folks. So can you put your hands up if you're in K-12? Okay. How about... Pardon? They were here yesterday? Okay. What about higher ed? Ah, okay. What about education companies? Okay, a couple folks. Is there anyone I'm missing in terms of categories? All right, so mostly higher ed. Okay, so that's super helpful for perspective. 1 second. So I'll tell you a bit about us and about some of the kind of principles that we use in terms of designing. So we're a company that's helping teach social emotional learning skills, as previously mentioned, around things like empathy, perseverance, and we're really focused in on early ed. Part of the reason why we're excited to be here is that we actually partnered with George Brown College as a university partnership to help design some of our materials around how do you engage and use technology to bring this education to teachers and also to parents at home. So I may skip over some of the more classroom-related stuff for K-12 as it may not be as relevant today. Just for some perspective on what is social emotional learning and why it's important, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but there's actually research that shows teaching social skills at a young age, as young as pre-K, kindergarten, if they can score high on these skills, they are 4 times more likely to graduate from college, to get jobs. And so there's this body of research that's come out recently to say, here, there's evidence to why we should invest in early ed. So be it if you're, you have an early ed learning program or at your university or profession, like it's so important to make sure that this is being taught. So we actually partner with some university campuses to provide not only kind of like, here's all what we've learned in terms of designing and maximizing learning for early ed, but here discounted access to our curriculum and program. It's also very important if you think about low-income communities and the needs there. It's very acute, and if anyone's interested, we have a whole presentation on research to help make a case for it, and we're happy to make that available for anyone. Specifically, some skills that are really important in this regards are things like self-regulation, if anyone's familiar. So this is like, how do you understand your own emotions and feelings? I feel like doing this startup, I had to learn a lot about this. But to young children, it's really, really important to be able to recognize these skills. And so that becomes more acute for certain communities. So what we did with our program and company is that we not only designed for, how do we impact and make it easier and more accessible to teach these skills for young, for early ed and for elementary educators, but also how do you reinforce and get that common vocabulary at home. And so our first kind of product that we came out with is a learning platform. We have about 12,000 educators in 90 countries registered on our site. Reaching over 150,000 students. And the things that we learned in terms of design principles was, how do you make it more accessible? Like, how do you offer something free? And so all our storybooks are actually free on our platform. How do you overcome things like, so this is our platform. How do you overcome things like know-how? So if you think about something like self-regulation, it sounds often overwhelming to especially like a new educator. And so how do we give, like, here's all the research behind why you should teach this, like their learning objectives, the vocabulary. So we map that all out for all our lessons, and we actually make that part of our program free for anyone to understand and get up the curve. We also made it easy that, so I think there was a reference in the earlier presentation around Common Core standards or literacy standards, be it in in Canada or the US. What we found is that if you can map things to required curriculum, so as much as everyone wants to teach social emotional learning, unfortunately it doesn't become a priority at the end of the day. So the way we did it is we made everything narrative focused. How do you, integrate it into read aloud time so that it actually can be justified as a, time spent by an educator. And then the connection to parents is really important. And this was interesting. We thought, oh, everyone has technology, but really, especially in the US, when we spoke with some communities, like having access to offline options and making that accessible is a big part of the equity equation. So how do you, if you're offering in a classroom or university campus, like how do you make your solutions equitable, that anyone can access those materials, they can, get that learning experience. And so we found it, really important to make sure that that was a design principle in terms of how we delivered what we're doing. So this is an example. We had a school that ended up having, home activity binders that went home. And then language is important too. And so especially in the US, we have a lot of districts that we work with in the US where up to 95% of their populations are Spanish speaking. And so if you're trying to engage parents, if you're not speaking their own language, you're not going to have that ability to connect with them. So a couple of things that we learned from in terms of a content standpoint. So this is around maximizing early learning, and this is some of the stuff that I recently got to speak at the National Head Start Conference. So this is the US equivalent to like their national pre-K or preschool programs. And it was interesting to see the reactions. Everyone was very engaged. And how do you incorporate social emotional learning, but how do you make it really engaging at the end of the day? It can't just be, oh, here's an emotion, let's learn about this emotion. Like, how do you really, use like online technologies to make that really relevant? So one of the first principles that we did was like, how do you really make it immersive? And this doesn't have to be our product, but like when you're picking solutions, how do you make it so magical and inviting that that students like crave it, that they want it? And so that was a big piece of our design principles of how do you design a world of learning. And so a couple of things that we did in terms of doing this, we had empathetic characters, and I'll show you them. So we spent a lot of time designing these characters, but growing up in Toronto, we really wanted the characters to reflect the diversity that we grew up with here. And so we have Lucia here, she wants to be an electrical engineer. She has a scarf on. Menka, she wants to be an aspiring architect. And so they're meant to be modern role models that typically in a lot of literature you just may not find. And so we made that a principle in terms of our learning materials that would be there. And so there's a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, skills, interests, and the students really gravitate towards the characters. We also use animals, and there's a lot of empathy that can be built by using animals as characters and where they live and how you put yourself in their shoes. And so that was very intentional in our design. We also designed this whole world, and I can geek out about this for hours, but it was like our team was very idealistic. You know, how do you really build this immersive place? And so all our buildings are actually inspired by the Spanish architect Gaudi. They've been, you know, very fluid, colorful, and I'll show you what we're developing in terms of like an interactive world, but the early kind of, you know, previews of it with students is like gasps. It's this excitement, and like we want that to be the reaction to learning. We don't want to be like, oh, I have to learn P-CAPAC. No, we want them to be like thrilled to learn P-CAPAC, and so that was really important for us. So the second principle that we looked at was how do you tie it to academic experience, and how do you make it that it's really focused? And so some of the things that we did is it was very rooted in narratives. We think the power of storytelling is really important. And so every one of our topics, even from self-regulation to empathy, there's a narrative that our characters take the students through. And I mean, I think there's lots of great narratives that teach these topics, and we actually provide a list of recommendations for free for educators on that. But it was really important for us to do that. So for every one of our books, we actually had a very focused learning objective in terms of the topic. We use a lot of vivid graphics, so right now in classrooms, they project it, they have the discussion. Right away, this is a pre-K class in New York. Right away, the students were volunteering, pointing to the emotion, what was happening, they're engaged in that learning experience. And it's obvious, like you can see right here. So here's Lucia, she's struggling with, you know, feeling emotions. She's like, I want to be optimistic, but like this is really hard. And right away, the students, you know, they get interested. They're like, I see what's happening. Like they may not know how to communicate what's happening, but they can see it. And they start getting a sense of like, what does it look like, feel like to feel these emotions? And so we've embedded it really kind of in a fun way in our stories, and it makes it that much more relevant. Like one of the greatest examples that I always hear from teachers is that it's not that they're saying, oh, I know I have to be respectful. They'll be like, remember when Zoe was disrespecting? Remember how that felt? And then right away they'll draw those connections. And so the power of stories is so big and so important to us as a company, and I highly recommend anyone to, you know, embed that in terms of that learning objective. The third principle we looked at was in terms of those stories, how do we make it in practice? So stories are a great starting part to give that context, but how do you like actually make it hands-on? And as much as we're a technology company, we really believe in the power of discussion, dialogue, and hands-on learning, and so we think technology can complement a lot of the learning that's happening in the classroom. And so we did a couple of things. We really structured, you know, you start off with this narrative, but then you have these kind of big ideas. How do you scaffold and build that understanding? So go from what is self-regulation, you know, why is it important? How do you actually demonstrate, and how do I internalize it? I may need to take 3 deep breaths, but you may need to do some yoga. Whatever it is, it's kind of understanding what makes sense for you. And so we took a really disciplined approach about that. We worked with a number of researchers to understand how we can, part of like overcoming those barriers is really working with educators to make sense for their classroom environments. I'm going to kind of skip ahead, just show you. So I talked about how the structure and sequence. And then it's very playful. So these are students actually doing yoga. They're trying to do child's pose. I realized child's pose is actually really difficult for kindergarten students, and they struggled. But they had a lot of fun, and they got to learn, and they learned about the benefits of, you know, thinking about using yoga. We also make it playful, so it was interesting. We actually gave access to all our backdrops from our stories and the characters. And these are like 4-year-olds. They were actually creating their own stories, and the teacher was helping them film them and make videos. And so they were kind of taking, you know, an extension of what we offered on our platform. And then lastly, the last design principle that we thought was really important, especially for early ed, is like how do you engage parents? And throughout our whole process, we were very collaborative, so we worked with over 300 educators, and then parents, we ended up doing about 50 interviews and learned really quickly a consistent trend. And so some of the quick high-level things, parents are super busy. They, you know, want to spend time, and they want things that fit into their lives. And so for us, like originally we had these, you know, ambitious kind of ideas of activities with like markers and glue, and parents were like, yeah, I'll do it, I'll get around to it. And unfortunately, we didn't get the engagement. And so we ended up working with George Brown College, their early learning ECE group, a PhD in early childhood education, Dr. Kimberly Brazier. And she helped us think through, like, how do we use play-based activities that are more discussion-oriented? So for example, if we're talking about something like gratitude, it could be, you know, over dinner, let's talk about who or what we're grateful in our family, in our house. And a simple conversation helps, you know, have that common vocabulary, the discussion at home, but also just makes it easy for them to incorporate into their lives. And that was really important for us in terms of designing. We also realized that, so I'm going to skip ahead. This is an example of what we would provide parents. A couple of key factors that we needed to provide. A, context, like what did their child learn that day? So we summarized every one of our lessons. 2 was, you know, the activity I mentioned, and 3 was access to the same storybook. So if they can have that shared literacy moment at home, there's a ton of research that says that, you know, having that moment is there's so much educational benefits. And so we encourage that through our stories, and we know students are actually the ones who are asking to reread the stories. So how we deliver this was interesting. So originally we had this platform where you had to, like, a parent had to sign up for an account, and parents hate that. They have so many logins, and if anyone here is a parent, I'm sure they know this and empathize. And so we were like, okay, what do you want? They're like, just send me like a text or an email update. And so our ultimate goal is to actually just do this via text. Right now it's just email updates. They opt in with one click. They get their email updates, and they get everything there. And via email, we can actually still track, you know, who's opening the emails, what topics, what books. And that data is important for teachers to be able to say, okay, these parents are on board, they're helping with their students. These students really need help, and this is a good conversation to have a parent-teacher conference about how I can engage and give them a resource to use. So those are the 4 principles that I wanted to kind of cover quickly. The new thing that we're doing, so we're also working with George Brown College's design school, is developing personalized kind of learning experiences. And the benefit here of doing this is that you're able to get data at a student level about how they're learning these social skills, how you can inform insights to parents or teachers around, you know, different activities or things that or questions to ask. And it also provides an engaging way to, you know, take the onus off the teacher and give not only parents but also teachers a way to engage your students on these topics. So this is like 3 months of development, so I'm not going to pretend like this is a fully baked game. But what we're doing, I'll show you quickly. This is Peekaville. So again, as I mentioned, we nerded out on building this beautiful world, and all our buildings here are inspired by Gaudi. And as they explore the world, they're able to take part in terms of matching games. So here's a matching game that links back to our stories. So this one is here. There's, you know, a system. There's also the ability to create your own avatar. This is me. Maybe I want a different outfit. Students right now we're doing consultations with classrooms. It's really fun. So I'm like, what else would you want? And the idea is it's not just a vain thing. It's actually, there's an intent. So the reason why we have an avatar is that if you think about social emotional learning, there's actually 5 key areas, and 2 of them are around the self. So one's about self-awareness, so understanding your own emotions and feelings. Another one's about self-management. How do you make those, you know, decisions? And so for those 2 areas, it really didn't make sense to put games that are about other characters. It really had to be things that impacted you as a person, or a representation of your person. And so the idea here that, like, there could be opportunities that we're starting to build out around, like, okay, you can check in, you know, instead of it just always being happy, you know, how are you feeling today? Or are there scenarios where things happen to your avatar in the world? And so this is going to be a part of what we're developing, and we're excited to, like, as I mentioned, we're at this early stage where we're actually doing a lot of consultations. We're looking for folks to help us, you know, explore this world. And part of it, we really wanted to be co-created. Like, this is, as I mentioned, like we said, you know, if we had to build an ideal world, if we imagine you start off from scratch, like, what would that be? And it can't just be our vision of an ideal world. Ideally, it's a vision that's a collective vision. And so part of what we're doing now is inviting classrooms to help us critique what we're doing, you know, help us have that discussion. You know, how do you really build that world? What are the values? What are the aspects of it? And how do you actually create aspects of it? So, like, for example, in Peekaville Library, I don't know where it is exactly, but there's a library in here. Like, imagine a student can create books. And as long as their parents and teachers approve, obviously from privacy standpoint, it could be available for every other student to read. And they're helping contribute to making this a better world. And so we're really excited about this. We're actually putting a lot of emphasis and focus on really building out this piece. This is something that educators and administrators in the K-12 space are looking for. And how do you make it that much more seamless for that data to come directly from students? And so if anyone's interested in collaborating or working, we do have some information, and we're happy to chat. Yep, Christina here from my team has more, and so we'd love to. We're also doing 2 live classroom visits locally, so at one TDSB school and another private school locally, to kind of see what the classroom experience is, as well as getting student reactions to it, which is really fun to see. I'll just give you a quick story, but like I was in Chicago 2 weeks ago, and I got to visit some classrooms. Turned around my laptop, showed them what I was doing, and literally, they'd only been in the program for 3 months. They all gasped, and they said, "Oh my God, will it be available for my birthday?" I was like, I don't know when your birthday is, but I'm excited that you're excited. And so it's pretty cool that they have that connection to the characters and like the world that we're building. Even they haven't even seen this before, just from the stories and narratives. And so we're really excited around how we can work with researchers, educators, anyone in the field to help us really make this a great learning experience for young students. So thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, my name is Hasni Zawali, but you can call me Haas. This is obviously an interactive presentation, so please feel free to raise your hand, interrupt me, contradict me too. I have a little game with our fellow here. She's probably going to contradict me a couple of times. I know that's going to happen. A little bit about my story, because my story would basically lead to Voila Learning and how it's been created. So I was born and raised in France, and I lived in Africa. So now, first language is Arabic, and then I had to learn French, and then after my MBA, I had to come to Canada to try to learn English. And I have really funny stories about me learning English, very embarrassing too, but I won't go in there. But you just gotta imagine, like this French guy who just showed up with like a velvet jacket, skinny jeans, pointy shoes, and very well dressed, and speaking like this, with a French accent. Very pretentious, maybe, but after all, we are French and we are alright. You North Americans don't understand the true nature of the soul. So obviously it didn't fly well. I mean, except on Church Street. It went really well on Church Street. And it was really fun for those who are familiar with Church Street. But anyway, the first job that I found was a job of teacher. And this is really interesting because I was here to learn English. And the first job that I found was an English teacher in a public school. Now this is tricky because it's not necessary to tell you that I was probably the most terrible English teacher in the history of English teaching. It was horrible. Now there's a little trick, with there's a little loophole in the Canadian/Ontarian school system, is that if you want to teach English or if you want to teach in a French school, publicly funded, you have somehow to be francophone. There was a lack of teachers back in the days, and a friend of a friend of a friend who was a principal, she's like, "Hey Hans, you speak English?" She says that in French. I was like, "Of course, I came here 3 months ago, of course I speak English." She's like, "I'm hiring you as an English teacher." And I started teaching English, grade 5 and grade 6, who were constantly making fun of me. And I was bribing them by saying, "I will basically play basketball with you guys in exchange of you not making fun of me." That lasted 3 months. It was really, really tough. And then I became a French teacher, which was basically a little bit more my area, right? But I understood how hard it was for students, for English students, learning French, because I went through that traumatic experience of me teaching English, a language that I don't really have any knowledge of. So I started thinking about what would be the best way to teach French. We started doing some design thinking in terms of these students, what do they go through, in terms of emotional journey. So you have the kid who comes in French immersion, he does like approximately 50% of his time to 100% of his time in French, but in an English Anglophone environment. So this is very interesting because, check this out. He goes in school, he speaks English with his parents, he's at recess right before 8 p.m., he speaks English, and then he gets in class. And he gets in class, and all of a sudden, he's got a French teacher saying, bonjour, bonjour, allez, asseyez-vous, enlève ton manteau. And he's like, oh my God, this is like, especially after a whole weekend speaking English, taking you out of your English bubble and trying to learn French in an English environment, it is really hard on both sides. Really hard for the teacher to teach, but really hard for the students who all of a sudden is like, okay, hold on a second, how can I say that I'm tired and I lost my homework kind of thing? Really hard. So, and then they start working on papers, fill in the blanks, où est mon parapluie, where is my umbrella? It's kind of really like basic French that we're trying to learn. Now they learn, this French, they get out, with some learning, and they get out in the classroom, or even more, they go back home or in their neighborhood. And in the neighborhood, there's absolutely no way they can practice their French in an English environment. Now, a little bit of, I don't know if I should use this, but I'm going to tell you why this is actually a massive problem. Okay. Okay, let's do it this way. So, I'm going to tell you why this is a massive problem, guys. It's very simple. The reason why it's a big problem because we invest hundreds of millions of dollars for the next generation to speak not the second language, but the other official language of Canada. It is very important to understand. This is not the second language, this is the other official language. It might be the second language in Ontario, but elsewhere it is either the first language or, like New Brunswick, same official language. Either way, for the federal, it is the other official language. So we have two official languages. We invest a lot of money for these kids to be able to speak two languages, which I think is awesome. Now, check this out. Check out these numbers. Out of 100 students who go to grade 1 French immersion, only 20% of them, meaning 20 of them, 20 out of 100, will end up in grade 12. Out of these 20, only 7% of them will be able to speak French. If this was a hospital, let's put it this way, hypothetically, just for the sake of argumentation, right? We have 100 patients coming in the hospital, and only 20% of them will get out alive. And only 7% of them will be cured. Now, obviously, this is not a hospital, and we're doing actually a really good job in Canada teaching our students, our kids, our next generation to be bilingual. We're doing an amazing job. So, to be honest, I've traveled pretty much all over Europe, Africa too, and I haven't seen anything like this, like what we do. But there's still a massive problem. The massive problem is there's no way for our students to practice what they learn in the classroom in society. That's why, while our learning, we came up with an idea, which is a tech ed company, and we come up with an idea of if we cannot change the environment they are in, why not create a virtual reality platform where they'll be able to use this French. Now, imagine this. We did some design thinking about the homework experience, which, by the way, might be the worst experience after the airport experience, to be honest. And it's me who's saying this, so imagine that. So the homework experience, especially the French homework experience, is actually quite traumatic. And it is a source of a lot of stress for parents, for teachers, and especially for kids. So we went again, with the emotional journey of the kids and the parents and the teachers in terms of homework. The kid comes in, goes to his room right away, he drops his bag, and he goes right away and play Xbox. And I play these super virtual, awesome games, that are really cool. And then mom, comes back from work and says, all right, homework time. And they go back to this paper, photocopied, fill in the blanks. Je m'appelle André, and I need to fill out the je m'appelle. So there's a huge disconnect in between what we're asking them to do at school and what they are used to in their life. They usually have an iPhone or a supercomputer in their hands, and we're still asking them to learn or to approach a specific language in a very old-fashioned way. We find that a problem, all right? But it is not an easy problem to solve. So let me show you a short video of what we've done. And this project here, we partnered with 35 school boards all across the country. But we also partnered with the French government because they also have the same problem with English. They have a terrible way to teach English to their students. All right, let me see. Is the sound working?
The virtual canvas actually helps you learn more French. You might even be the best in class.
It's a new and fun way to learn French.
When I'm playing games on the campus, I'm also learning at the same time.
What I like about the virtual campus is that if I want to play with my friends on the game, I can play games with them.
They love video games. I think this generation, most kids are on computers, and I think you've tapped into the type of games, the interactive component, because he will play online games where he's communicating with other players.
Learning a second language is challenging for many reasons. One of them is the fact that whenever students are learning inside the classroom, they rarely have the opportunity to apply it in society. The second is gamification. In today's world, homework is competing with video games. Well, we have created a virtual campus where students can get the best of both worlds. A campus where they can practice their French like ordering a coffee in French like if they were downtown Paris, while having fun using gamification.
I've noticed that my child is so engaged. She loves playing the French games that are on the site.
My parents aren't always able to help me with my French homework.
Fine with the virtual campus, it's filling in the gaps that I have as a non-French speaker.
If I do not know how to speak this word or pronounce it, I type it up, and then the online tutors see me, they can give you the answer or help you with it.
It's fantastic. It's like having a tutor on call.
We try to make it as free as possible for everyone. When school board registers, every student can have access to it 4 times every week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We have teachers connected, helping them in French, math, and English.
Whether you're a parent or an educator, come to our virtual campus today at voilalearning.com.
So you see what we're talking about here, we're talking about a call center where we have teachers based on the 3rd floor of an elementary school in Toronto and in Vancouver, helping students every evening except Friday with this virtual reality platform. So, imagine this. We do have virtual reality. Okay, that's great. My vacation. Awesome. All right, we're gonna do this now. I think it's great. Yeah. So we do basically have this virtual reality campus where students can go inside rooms. They have basically, yeah, you don't need to read this because that's not mine. It's completely off topic. I'm just making sure that you guys follow me. So they go to these rooms, basically they are very virtual. They can sit down in the room, they have a whiteboard, we can put anything on the whiteboard, we can learn through videos. But that's not it, really, because what we did right there, especially like the first years, is just transposing and taking the reality and putting it through a computer. So it's still a classroom, and we haven't really disrupted anything. What becomes really interesting is that when we build all these mountains, all these soccer fields, and this outdoor landscape, we put situational stations. Like, for instance, a coffee shop. And in the coffee shop, the student needs to go to the coffee shop, and there's a teacher who's a barista, and who's like, "Bonjour, je voudrais un café, s'il vous plaît." And the teacher really teaches him and accompanies him in how to order a coffee the proper way, either in Quebec or in France or any francophone country in the world. So now it's more hands-on. You see how they go to a reception of a hospital, and the situation is, you just broke your leg. You need assistance. You need to talk to someone, and the nurse is right behind. So the nurse is one of our teacher, and she's like, "Bonjour, comment est-ce que je peux vous aider?" And you need to really express yourself. "I'm in pain. I just broke my leg," and you need to make sure
that people on the other side understand you, and we guide them through that. You see? That basically changes everything, because it gives them a real connection about what they learn in the classroom to the real life. Coffee shop, go interact with this person, you gain 200 points. If you order the equivalent of a latte in French, which is une noisette or un café latte, well, you gain 300 points. If you explain your problem about your broken leg, you gain 500 points. You get also the train station. You need to go from Paris to London. You need to get a ticket, about, like, to purchase a ticket. So this is really what it's all about. It's about immersive teaching, where we're basically showing them what to do if they were downtown Quebec, in France, or Senegal, or Paris. That's really what it is. And we're running a little bit out of time, right? So I'm not going to eat everything, but what Voila Learning too, and I think it would be a good transition with the person who speaks next. The idea is we are also a social enterprise. So it's a company that generates money. We sell these products to a lot of school boards, a lot of parents in France and Canada, but we also invest some of our profits into development in few countries, meaning Ghana, Somalia, Tunisia, Haiti. What we do over there is we try to bring technology and try to give access to education to as many people, as many students as possible. Not as easy. You'll see why right after, because we basically have a specialist here now who's going to be talking about this. And I'm asking you to, welcome Wanda!
I would like to thank very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a great honor to be able to speak with you. And I hope at the end that if there's any connections that we can make to help our programs go forward in the developing world, we'd really love to hear from you. Just a little explanation, 60 Million Girls, where did the name come from? When we first started the foundation in 2006, it was estimated at the time that there's 110 million children around the world every year who don't have access to elementary school. Close to 2/3 or 60 million are girls. It's a huge problem. When we first started out the foundation, we were really focused on access to education, so getting girls into school. And over the years, we've learned a lot. We've worked with a number of partners. We've invested $2.5 million in 20 projects in 14 countries around the world, and we've learned an awful lot. And more specifically, in about the last 2 or 3 years, we've been focusing more on learning. At this point, according to UNESCO statistics, about 90% of children around the world are in elementary school. The last 10% are the hardest ones to reach. Those are the kids that are in conflict zones, in refugee camps, handicapped children, and children in very isolated rural areas. And so I try to visit the projects that we support every year. And as I go there, I also try to benchmark to see what else is going on. So I just want to show you a few pictures. There we go. I was in Sierra Leone in last year, in November. And this is one of the elementary schools there. And just to give you an idea, this is a grade 1 class. There's 144 kids in the grade 1 class. You might notice there's some wood in the middle. This is actually supposed to be 2 classrooms. There's supposed to be 2 teachers, and that's how the classrooms are separated. The day that I went, there was only 1 teacher there. As you can see, there's not really desks for all the kids. There's benches. In this particular area, and this is northern Sierra Leone, Konadugu district, about 50% of the teachers are not paid. The government simply can't afford them, so they're volunteer teachers. And of the teachers who are there, who are paid, only about 75% are actually trained teachers. So having a good, qualified, trained teacher is a huge, huge problem in these areas. There's also a few textbooks. It's really difficult to get teaching aids there as well. So one of the things that we decided to start doing about 3 years ago, and it just happened a little bit by chance, our partner there had been using laptop computers, just had about 8 of them, and we're letting the high school girls learn Word and Excel and PowerPoint. I remember going there and thinking, well, that's really nice, but just how helpful is it? There's no electricity in these communities, there's no internet access, there's no printers, there's no computers in the classrooms. And then we thought, well, wouldn't it be really interesting if we could get academic content onto those computers that can help the kids learn on their own? And the basic premise we always had in back of our minds was to remember that there's not enough qualified teachers. So if we start introducing technology, there's no way that we're going to be able to start training teachers on top of that on how to use technology. There's no IT specialists. As I said, there's no electricity, there's no internet access. So from the very beginning, we were focused on trying to do something to reach children directly in a self-directed way. So one of the things that we came up with originally is we knew about Khan Academy, so the math tutorial program, and we knew that there's an offline version. Again, the big difficulty, the big challenge we have is to put any content on there is it's got to be offline. There's so much, and I've heard so much today and over the years about what's available online, but there's a lot less that's available offline. So what we first did is we downloaded Khan Academy, so KA-Lite, the offline version, on a USB key, put it in a computer at our partner location. And we basically said, just put Khan Academy on, and that's it. Don't explain it to the students, don't tell them anything, don't tell them how to work with it, and let's just see what happens. So the girls were introduced to the computers, and Khan Academy was on there, and of course they had a lot of trouble at first, but like everything in life, and there's a group of other students around, somebody clicks the right thing at the right time and gets a little bit further and a little bit further. Within about an hour, the kids were able to use Khan Academy, and the girls loved it. It was actually a very different way of learning and understanding math that they had ever seen before. So from that, in 2013, when we first started, went through a few iterations, and this is the most recent version, which we call the Mobile Learning Lab. So it's basically off-the-shelf tablets, so we now use Samsung tablets, and we've brought them to Sierra Leone. We have a system of a solar charging system, because again, there's no electricity. So there's three, I don't know if you can see them very well, the solar panels on top, and a very basic system, so you have 3 batteries, and then you have a charging system, so it's a USB plug. So you can connect the tablets directly into them. The whole system, the solar charging system is about $1,500. So we can charge up, there's a lot of sun. Sun is free, so that's not a problem. We use what's called a Rachel. So we're working with an organization in California, and they've developed this server. We can put 500 gigs of content on there, and then that content is distributed to the tablets Wi-Fi. So there's no wiring. It's a completely self-contained unit. And on the Rachel, we have things like Khan Academy, Wikipedia Academic, Hesperian Health encyclopedias. There's textbooks. We worked with an Australian NGO, developed an offline version of their literacy software based on phonics called Fantastic Phonics. There's books that were created in Africa, so in Sierra Leone and Ghana and so on. African Storybook Project. There's all kinds of amazing content on here. This just to give you an idea of what the roads are like. I'm from Montreal. You know what potholes are like in Montreal? This is considerably different. This was in November, so it was about 2 or 3 months after the rainy season. And this is one of the huge, huge problems you have, and again, in a lot of isolated rural areas in Africa and in other countries around the world. It's just really difficult to get access. So if we were trying to provide the content that's on that small Rachel device to ship it up to these different communities in terms of books, and you wouldn't have the interactive games or tutorials or anything like that, you would be talking about tens of thousands of dollars if you could find it, and you couldn't necessarily update it. So with the Rachel, what we do is we basically have a little suitcase, and we've got 30 tablets in there, and the Rachel fits in, so you can take that suitcase and really make it anywhere, so it's very mobile. So you have the 30 tablets, and we just hand them out to the kids, and then we let the kids go, we walk away. So we did our first experiment with younger kids in November, so we had 30 kids from 4 different schools. They came after school. They weren't told anything at all. We just handed them each a tablet and walked away. The tablets weren't even turned on. And now you gotta remember, in these communities, They don't even have televisions. I mean, some people have mobile phones, but there are no computers there. Within about 30 seconds, the first kid learned to turn it on. Within a minute, everybody had their tablets on. Within 15 minutes, they had figured out how to connect to the server and were using Khan Academy. It was unbelievable, the reaction, and the kids loved it. Again, you have to remember they're in these huge overcrowded classes. They don't have access to a lot of interesting material. The books are often outdated. They don't have enough textbooks for all the kids. For them to be able to go on these tablets and to be able to see videos and to be able to play games and to interact with them was simply amazing. By the end of the first session that we did, we gave them about 90 minutes on these tablets. The kids, first of all, they were working with one another, even if they were from different schools. They were dancing around, they were jumping around. They were really, really excited about what they were learning. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to focus on. We can't replace teachers. We have invested in the past in teacher training. The problem in these rural areas is once a teacher does get well trained, they'll tend to go to other areas where they have better access, better infrastructure, and better pay. So we were really trying to find something that we could put directly in the children's hands. So we did this experiment with the kids, and I mean, they really loved it. It is an after-school program. We did not want to place it within the school, again, because we don't want to add more layers and require more supervision, and we wanted to try to give it as directly as possible to the kids, and we also wanted to make it wide-ranging. The kids can work on anything they want, whether it's science, math, English, history, geography, agriculture, health, whatever they want. Because what we're trying to do is really tap into their interest, their natural curiosity, and to make learning fun. The dropout rates after elementary school are really high, especially for girls, and that's a key turning point in a girl's life to be able to keep her in school into high school. And so the hope with this system is to really build that interest, also build the self-confidence in the kids to say, hey, I can do this on my own, and I have a really fun way to learn. So what we're doing starting in September, we've been working with McGill University in the past year. You can see here just the kids, that was on the first day when they were using the tablets and how they were really enjoying it and working together. We've been working with McGill University in the past year to develop a series of tests and studies, and we're launching an evaluation program in September of this year. We'll be following 1,000 children for a one-year period. We have 2 control groups and 5 groups of kids in the intervention communities. We'll be testing their math and literacy skills before and after, but we're also going to be testing their non-cognitive skills, because we believe that having access to this is really going to increase their intrinsic motivation, their self-confidence, and even their aspiration levels. These kids don't have an opportunity to see so many things that we take for granted. We know from the previous projects that we've done, when the kids see women or other kids doing things that they've never seen before, again, it motivates them to think bigger and to think of what the possibilities are. The mobile learning lab to completely set up costs under $5,000. Wow. The operating costs per year about 8 cents per hour per student. Wow. So with the solar charging system that we have, we can offer about 12,000 student hours per year on these systems. So it's a low cost, high impact system. The nice thing with the Rachel server that we have is if you take it to a location where you can connect it to the internet, you can upgrade and change any of the content you want at any time. Everything that we're using on it is free, open source, and we're constantly looking for more content. So I launch the appeal out to you. If you're able to help us in any way to really grow this, our intention is, once we've done the evaluation that we can really prove the concept, is to really scale it up nationally and through many countries. It's also being tried by some of our partners in Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania as well. So,
please add Ghana.
And Ghana, I will add Ghana, no problem. It's such an easy system to put in place. Again, you don't need IT specialists. You can customize the content that's on there. Obviously this we did in English, because in Sierra Leone, even though English isn't the mother tongue, that's the language, the national language. There's all kinds of content in French and Spanish and Arabic, in other languages as well.
was just curious, are you looking from this community for like content origination, or are you looking for people to volunteer overseas in distribution? Like what are the sort of choke points?
That's the content.
It's content.
It's content.
Yeah.
And as much as possible, we'd like content that makes sense in the context
Right.
that we're in. We're
Culture.
looking at African books. You know, reading is so vitally important. Obviously, literacy, it makes a world of difference if kids can be reading a book that means something to them.
Right.
So that's a big thing.
So are you tapping then African authors? Because there are a bunch who can offer the right content in the right context.
Again, that's just to get the connections to these people who would be able to offer it. Again, everything that we've got on there so far is open source, so it's free content. We can't afford to keep paying for licenses and so on. But we know there are a lot of very generous people out there who'd love to be able to do that. Yeah. We have a website, so it's 60milliongirls.org. We'd be very happy to hear from anyone. It's a really simple process. We work with World Possible, so the NGO in California, whatever content we find, they would upload it onto the Rachel for us. So even if the Rachel is in Sierra Leone, as long as our partner can get to internet access, they can upload the content at that time. So we'd be glad to hear from you. Yes?
Do you have partners in South Africa? Because if you don't, I'd probably be busy something.
We don't presently have partners in South Africa. So.
Something to
Absolutely. We'd love that very much.
Just curious, what are your biggest hurdles in community implementation?
We've learned in the last 10 years that the most important thing is community engagement. We may have what we think is a fantastic idea, but if it's not something that the community wants, it's going to be there to really take care of it and support it and make it grow. It just won't work. So that's got to be the number one in any community that we work in. Because, you know, we're putting equipment that's, you know, relatively expensive, especially things like the solar panels. So I was speaking with someone previously, and they said, well, they're going to be stolen. But again, if you have this community engagement and commitment, and they know that it's something that's good for their children, and you know, the parents that I meet everywhere know that education is really the only way out. So they're very much willing to support it and make sure that things work well. But again, you have to really take the time to work with the community, make sure that's what they want, and that they're there to help you.
And that's a great point, because a lot of times foreigners go to African countries and don't understand the concept of respectful entry into a community, and having those community conduits to help you gain entry into, I call them cultural brokers, to help you be able to gain entry into those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. The trial test that we've been doing with the grade 5 students, so we formally started that in November. The kids came back every week. We've been offering it, so it's been about 14 weeks. They're still fully engaged, but we had to get the community involved beforehand. The parents have to know, where are the kids going? This is an after-school project. You know, what are they learning? What's it going to do for them? How is it going to help them out? So that's absolutely huge. And every time, you know, we've been really following very closely what the kids are doing, what they're saying, their comments, and we keep tweaking it. We get often really surprised because there's certain things, again, as you say, it's their context. We might not think of it the same way, and oh, okay, well, that would be more helpful to the kids, so we can keep tweaking the content that's on there as well.
So I'm pretty sure we lived the same experiences. You know, I mean, in our case, you know, we started with Somalia, and then went to Haiti. Sure. And then we went to Haiti, and after Haiti, we went to Ghana, and it was only after the third iteration, Ghana, where it was a fantastic experience. Now, one of the reasons why I'm saying this is because at first, you know, we thought that bringing tablets and bringing content to Somalia and to Haiti, and we went back to Haiti, you know, 3 times, as a matter of fact. In fact, you know, we haven't really measured the actual impact of what we were doing. We thought that we were going with the assumption, and it was a good assumption, that if we bring tablets and if we bring content, the community and the kids will definitely benefit from it. And now we learned, I'm pretty sure, you know, we've experienced that a little bit, we've learned that in the hierarchy of Maslow, we're talking about
a village or community that is basically in like the basic needs, like I need food and I need shelter. So we bring like a $50 tablet in their hands, and all of a sudden it's so awesome. There's a big wow that very shortly after we leave, that wow transforms into, what if I sell the tablet? That will bring food to my family for at least 3 weeks to a month. So we started trying to see things in a different view, different point of view in terms of impact. So I have this friend, who basically created a soccer ball that kids play with, and after kicking it around, enough time, you take that soccer ball and you can actually plug your phone and it will recharge your phone. Amazing idea. It was in South Africa. I came back like two months ago, not even. And it was an amazing invention. But for some reason, in terms of impact, it didn't have the expected impact. Why? There's no mother that's gonna give like the most valuable piece of electronics to their kids to kick around. So that was not happening. And they were taking that ball and they were like, very gently, because no way they're gonna play in the dust and the mud, with it. So what do you think, we should do when it comes down to this disconnect in between what or where we want them to be in terms of approaching education and exactly what you said, taking that education and using it in the local context, how to grow a certain type of food, how to do this, how to sell that, and microfinancing, for instance, how does it work? And trying to basically, bridge the gap, with that. It's really an economical disconnect. How would you approach that?
Well, again, I know there was a lot of concern just about putting the solar panels on because, again, people said, oh, somebody's going to take them and sell them or use them themselves. But again, it comes back to the community engagement. You have to have people locally, keeping their eye out and saying, hey, this is valuable for the whole community, not just, for my child, but for everybody. And when we've shown this, we've had village chiefs work on Khan Academy and finding it like really fantastic. Well, that's one of the leaders in the community who's going to say, this is important for us and we're going to make sure it keeps working.
Right.
So we have a coordinator who will be working at each mobile learning lab, and their responsibility is first of all to charge up the tablets because they need to be charged up, and then to distribute them to the children, and at the end of the session to get them back and put them back in the case, and then they're locked. They're kept in a local community center, again, that's overseen by the community. It could happen. We've been very fortunate to date that it's worked well. The other thing we were concerned about too is, the kids are really excited at first. Is that going to wear off over time? We've had this going for 14 weeks. It's an after-school program. It's on a voluntary basis. You got to remember, most of these kids have one meal a day. To come back at 2 o'clock and spend an hour and a half. But they come back. I mean, we have about 90-95% retention rate even after 14 weeks. So, but those are all things that we're going to be able to measure in the process.
I'm pretty sure that if you are able, after a year or two, to measure how many kids didn't know how to read in terms of phonetic awareness, for instance, and after your program, now we cannot only give credit to that program because there are obviously local teachers who are trying to help.
And that's why we have a control group that's also going through school, but just doesn't have access to the mobile learning lab. So
that's actually exactly what we should do. In a year or two, we can show that 95% of the students who went through this program now know how to read, versus 75% of the students who didn't go through the program just learned how to read with their local teacher. What we've done, in Ghana, we tried, as much as possible to make the kids understand that education is basically related to everything. So in the school, actually, here's a funny story. We have these panels, and the first time the panels get stolen. So we switch them with generators. Generators is a big problem because it makes a lot of noise, right? So we went back to the solar panels and we put them on the roof, and we're like, okay, we need to secure those panels, guys, because they get really stolen. It's a lot of money for, you gotta imagine, it's almost like putting like a piece of gold in front of you. So we also students and teachers, how can we secure them, guys? And one kid, looks at us and he says, we can build a wall around it. And I was like, buddy, no, you don't understand how it works. The sun, we need access to the sun. So
in that school, what we've done is we actually built a local shop, but also a local garden. So if you go on Voila Learning, you'll see what they've done is basically trying to grow tomatoes. There's a lot of droughts over there. We're trying to save the water. Water treatment system, super important. Grow tomatoes, grow different vegetables, and sell these veggies and everything they grow in the shop. So that basically everything is a loop. You have, the agriculture part, there's the selling part, and there's also the education that's catered into entrepreneurship. So that students can really understand that, okay, this is not only about learning how to read. Because I have the feeling that at some point, some students, it's really hard to get them back into it. They don't really see the purpose of reading. They're like, why do I need to read if I just gonna paint a wall and get $3 for it?
I think one of the things that we noticed, as I said, when we did these trials, is at one point the question was asked, how do you learn best? And all the kids said, well, with a book. And they didn't believe that there was any books on the tablet because in their mind a tablet is a game and it's fun. And I think that's one of the key things too, is they don't look at it as learning, and that's okay. We don't want them to think of it, oh, okay, this is a tutorial after school, you gotta come and you have to learn English again. It's not directive at all.
Awesome.
So a child could be working on the music program, we have MIT Scratch on there, they can be doing whatever they want. But again, we feel that if the child is doing something that's fun to them, they're gonna learn. It may not be linear as to what they're learning in school, but the big thing in terms of literacy, because that's the fundamental of everything.
That's the base, right?
Everything that they're doing on there is in English. So whether you're doing music or geography or history, you keep practicing your English as you're going along. So, but again, it's not simple. It's like any change you want to make or any new system you want to put in place. And again, that's why we're doing the evaluation to really try to see over a long period what it's going to do. But from all the trials that we've done today, we're pretty confident that it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's all about iteration at some point until you reach that level.
Well, you're just going to be tweaking and changing one thing or another. And while it works extremely well in this and under these conditions, it might be a little bit different in Ghana or Kenya or Uganda, or there's different things going on. But I guess the basis of it is that it's really simple. You don't need specialized IT people working on it. It can just be implemented and it goes right to the kids right away.
Through this, in November, we go into Nicaragua and to teach basically English through the 3D platform that you saw. It is really experimental and we are ready to say that it might fail. But you know what, we always go with this assumption, not even an assumption, it's really a guideline. There's a big poster in our office that says, fail fast and cheap. And that's really important, to fail fast and cheap, especially when you're trying things and when you're trying to disrupt education, because this is what we're talking about. At the end of the day, when we think about it, whether we're talking about Africa or developing countries, they are more ready than we are. We are not, the problem is not that they are not ready, they have that sooner or later, they're gonna have internet, they're gonna have iPhones, they're gonna have smartphones. Some of them don't even know what is a landline. They skip the landline, they skip the cell phone, and they went straight to the smartphone. They are ready. We are simply not ready to deliver the right content, exactly what Wanda said, in the right context. All they have to chew on is basically some knowledge and some content that is designed for Europe or North America. I've been reading that research, it's fantastic research, that says, according to the IQ test, Africans are lower than Europeans. And I was like, this is so racist. It's unbelievable. And I started reading the thing, and it is absolutely true. Now, what doesn't say, what the IQ test doesn't say, is that the IQ test has been designed by European male for white male, not even female. That's why in the IQ test, women sometimes are just a little bit lower. So don't even imagine about an African child who, by the way, probably knows how to take his raft, and read the stars and get his way, in the sea. I take any kid, from Toronto and put him in a and the thing, he's probably going to end up in the rocks, right? So all this is very important, and I think it's awesome. We would love, to see what you do, and and just really reach out and help you in any means.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chelsea. Because I think it's, you know, we've been working with so many partners, and I mean, this has been going on obviously for a very long time, but the classic approach to teaching is just not working in so many areas. And to be able to do something different, we really have to think out of the box, and we're not discounting school learning because the schools are still there, the kids are still going to school, but this is just additional, something more, to give them another chance, another way of learning things, and see where it goes. I mean, this is great. Ultimately, our dream is to have these learning centers not only for the kids, but for the teachers and for the parents.
For the parents.
You know, you think of Sierra Leone with the Ebola crisis that went through. If you had these learning centers in all different communities, you could put videos about how to prevent Ebola that could be sent out to thousands of villages at once, done by somebody local, explaining things in a way that people there would understand, make a huge difference. So I think the technology has possibilities. It's to find the best delivery system that's possible.
But to be fair, you know, where Wanda went, she went to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a tough place to start. It's like I think even harder than Somalia, because Somalia is right next to Kenya, which has the best internet in Africa. But if you start like in South Africa, if you go, I'm pretty sure it's gonna work. If you go to Ghana, amazing country, amazing people. You go there, you'll see. I'm pretty sure what you're doing is gonna work. So yeah,
so if it can work in Sierra Leone,
that's what it is. Yeah, if it works in Sierra Leone, I'm sure it's gonna work elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello everybody, we'll be starting this session, last session of this long day. I'm Tom. I'm a professor at Centennial and also at James Brown, and I work with Przemyk. Yeah, and well, you probably know me already.
Now, yeah.
I'm professor at George Brown, since yesterday vice president of IABL as well. We started talking some time ago about using videos in classrooms. We both teach technology courses, so it's programming and running labs with students and doing tutorials and stuff like that. Sometimes it's challenging for us and for students. And Tom proposed the solution that we will be talking about. So using a simple idea, just record what you're doing and let them do it later, right? Because the biggest complaint that we had in our courses was about the fact that for students, it's hard to follow whatever we are doing in the lab. And in many cases, if you miss one step, you're behind, right? You're lost, and it's really hard to catch up during the session, right? And on the other hand, if we start working with each individual student, having 30 of them in the lab, basically lab goes sideways, and you're never able to finish whatever you started, right? So that was the idea that is behind this presentation. So what we have, well, video in general is used in many places, and you can find some research on that. Basically, wherever you have a situation where there is a skill acquisition, video is pretty useful, right? We had a nice example in the session before with the music, right? And commenting on how it can be done. Cooking. Chef School is using some videos for instructing students how to do it. Basically, using the same idea. They record the session, right, with the camera on top, record the session and allowing students to review and catch up with the steps that they may miss in the face-to-face interaction, right? But you have other ideas. You have narrative videos when the full instruction is basically done through the video online, right? Especially used in online courses. What we do is record at lecture sessions. You can have tutored video instructions when you run the video and then the instructor jumps in, gives some narrative, and then goes back to video and switches between these two modes, right? So you have lots of flexibility in terms of using video. And lots of places where you can find them useful, right? Medicine, cooking, engineering, electronics. As I said, wherever you have this skill acquisition, right? You have to do something manually. You want to look closely how it's done, and this way you can, video can be helpful, right? Because what it allows for students, it allows for them to do it on their own pace. Pause, go back, repeat, wherever they need. So our goal was to provide additional support to students in IT courses, especially programming, allowing students to review the lab exercises after the session or before the examination. And for us, it was also to minimize the overhead. Because then if you're teaching several sections and you have students coming back after each session with additional questions, that really takes a lot of your time.
You can certainly refer them back to the video. So you record your demonstration, you go through the steps, step by step, and then we do say, well, I'm not going to reteach you what we just talked about last session. However, take a look at this video, look at the playlist, and here's all the instructions you need to study or be prepared for your assignment, exam, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Will you talk about tools that we use?
So typically, I mean, back in the day, and I kind of went over this in the workshop that we did on Wednesday, which we recorded. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we have to record everything. That's part of the whole thing. At the beginning, we used to start using, we had all these other tools to transcode everything from when we record and then upload everything to YouTube. But nowadays, all you need is YouTube, primarily. So YouTube has a live streaming service that they offer. What you do is you sign up for YouTube, you create a channel, and then what you do is you record yourself through YouTube, and then away you go. I mean, it's really that simple. It's a one-stop shop. You don't have to do any transcoding or uploading for the most part. The only thing that I ever use software for is for backup. And that's because sometimes your internet connection might drop, you might have a Wi-Fi issue or something, and again, we talked about best practices. I'm not going to reteach you that stuff, you have to go back to the video. Right? Go on.
That's a good approach. So we started recording sessions. Because we are recording in the lab, labs usually are 2 hours. We split it in half, so we have a break in between. Those sessions are around 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes long. So it's pretty long video to watch, right? But you have the whole process recorded. It is published immediately, and that's something that is really helpful on one hand side. On the other, it creates some issues, but we'll talk about those issues in a minute. We don't do any post-production, right? So it goes to YouTube as it is. Because, again, we don't have time for that. But what is the feedback? Feedback from students is pretty good, because what we've seen 97% of students that did access the recording on demand. So that's one thing. There is an option with YouTube where you can join the live streaming, but that's very low. There are just few students doing that. But at the same time, we see that this trend is going up, right? So more students are joining online. Is it good or bad? That's another discussion, right? Because usually we want to have them in the lab, right? We want to have face-to-face interaction with those students. But as a backup, this is pretty good solution. What else? We have, we've been watching at the date, looking at the dates when students watch the video, and most of them access those recordings right before the examination period, right? So
just-in-time learning.
Just-in-time learning. And like I do the lab tests that are open book and open internet. So I've been looking at students in my class, and they've been watching videos as they come to the test, during the test, right? Which may be surprising, but that's if they choose to do that, I'm fine with that. But that's the average duration of what they see or what they watch. Like not 6 minutes out of 50. Right? For live streaming, so when they join the live session, it's about 18 minutes, or 20 minutes roughly, right? Again, out of 50-minute session, right? So what we see, they're coming for a very specific thing in the presentation. They jump into the specific place, they review what they need, and they go back to work, to exercise, or whatever. Right? They don't spend the 50 minutes watching the video.
Just want to add that the reason why we do this is, again, just to reiterate, is we want to help the students have some other resource, because it's the most relevant resource, right? You're doing your lab, your lecture, it's going to be different this time than it is the last time, even the next time, right? It's specifically for that session that we want to target, right? So that's why a lot of times they only watch the stuff that they need, because it's the stuff that they need to know. For example, in an assignment, if we go over an assignment, in that particular recording, they look at the details of that assignment and to remind themselves of the checkpoints that they need to kind of meet in order for them to be successful, right? So it's the kind of stuff that they do. So that's why the watch time is what it is. Again, this whole idea of just-in-time learning, because for the most part, we know, all of us know, that students don't read the book, right? They're there the minimum amount of time they need to be there because they have a lot of other courses. A lot of them have 6, 7, 8 courses sometimes at the same time that they're doing.
Plus working.
Plus working, plus other things. So this is very convenient for them, and it offers another mode, right? And sometimes the students don't learn well in class. They're just not they don't like the noise. There's a lot of chit-chat and distractions, and so it enables them, some group of students to learn in a different way, right? So.
And well, I've been talking about the stats, right? The big peaks around the examination period. Most of them are accessing those videos from their computer. So again, the suggestion is that they're practicing and going to the video as a support, right? Okay, issues. As I said, we are not doing any post-production. So we're not exactly following the regulations. We are not making it like a mandatory part of our course, right? They don't have to go and watch the videos. It's another support, right? They see the screen capture. So in terms of privacy, we are safe in a sense. We are trying to be careful in terms of recording questions and discussions in the class. Usually the recording stops and then we go into discussion mode for 2 reasons. One, right, we don't want to have students recorded, right? Second thing, this is quite useless for the person who is watching video. Mostly because they cannot hear students, they cannot hear questions, and even if you go into a discussion, this is kind of sidetracking from the main topic. Sorry. Where we have to be careful is jumping into the whiteboard and drawing, because we are not recording the whiteboard. So if we do something like that, we need to use some other tools. But it's not impossible, right? We can do that.
It's quite easy to incorporate, actually. If you have anything that's on the screen, really, it's going to be recorded. So whatever you put on there, whether it's a piece of drawing software, even paint, you actually can draw on there, and that's your whiteboard, right? It doesn't have to be the traditional whiteboard or blackboard that we're used to today. I'm not, and by the way, I don't want to diminish the need for board work. It's not about that. We talked about that at the session on Wednesday. So there's other kind of software, free online tools for professors and teachers to use. To kind of incorporate this into their workflow.
I think the biggest issue that we have to figure out is the captioning, right? To follow the regulations and universal design ideas, we need to have we need to find a way to add it and add it in a way that is accurate, because right now, with YouTube, you can have the automated captioning. But for example, with my accent, it's not necessarily the most accurate.
Even my accent.
So
that's right. Yeah. For the machine, you do, right? Yeah. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. So that's I think that's the biggest issue right now with what we do. Otherwise, the feedback from students is pretty good. we definitely see improvement, and I've been kind of comparing my experience with and without video, teaching the same course, game development. And students really like it, and students ask if you miss one session, they will ask you for the recording, right? So that's my experience.
Same thing. Yeah, it's very addictive. Once they watch your videos and they tell other people, hey, that professor that teacher he does videos, right? So then they want to join the class because we do something different than everyone else. It enables them to do things like remote learning sometimes, whatever, especially if it's a snow day. They think about these things, or if they want to work and watch it after. So they come to it, and if you don't do it, then they're like, wait a minute, well, what happened? You missed last session. Did you record the video? Or what happens when you have a breakdown, like Wi-Fi doesn't work, whatever. So that's why, like I said, there's a need for backup, just to make sure that the student experience is, kind of kept consistent.
What we can definitely say, try it. We'll post a Tom video from Wednesday. He was recording the session and showing all the tools and how he set up the whole session. I think we didn't mention one thing, that you need to have a system for naming, so it's easy to find specific file, specific recording from specific weekend, specific class. Because that's something that is in the feedback from students, right? They want to have some kind of a naming convention, tagging, and descriptive description of the video.
We're not talking about a search engine optimization, like for them to find you, but I found that what the students like is in the title of the video. They want you to give as much description as possible. And I think you have up to 100 characters to do that in YouTube. So you can simply say something like, let's say if I'm doing Comp 100, if I was teaching computers 100, Comp 100, let's say Intro to Programming.
Winter 2016.
And then it's, Winter 2017 or whatever it would be. And then something like assignment number 2 details. Something like that, just to tell them what they're looking at. So then when they search through your playlist, they're able to find that video quick. And that's really about it.
Encourage you to try. And if you have questions, please contact us.
As well as I'm willing to offer any kind of, if you want any kind of training or whatever, I'm sure we can always kind of make it out there to your institution, wherever that is, and kind of do kind of a one-on-one session for small groups. I think it's instructive. And this is my motivation for this. It's not a paid thing necessarily. It's the reason why I'm putting it out there is like this. If we all do this, right, and we offer a better solution for students, right? Again, this is not going to replace textbook or the materials, the PowerPoint slides, or anything like that. It's not meant for that. It's meant to enhance. Okay, and that's what I think I want to leave you with. Unless you want to add anything.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Howard Gerhardt, and I teach at George Brown College.
And my name is Amina Oland, and I'm an instructional developer at George Brown College in e-learning and teaching innovation.
And we've been working together on my flipping a classroom. So I flipped a classroom this last semester. Now, keep a couple of things in mind. First of all, this is the first time through, so it's a learning experience for me as well as for the students. I think probably where I should start is to tell you a little bit about the course that I was actually flipping. It was a general education course. It's called Happy Birthday Canada, celebrating the 150th birthday of the country. Talking about social and cultural high points, low points of our history. So that was the actual basis of it. Why I just wanted to do it, there were 3 real reasons that I wanted to do it. First of all, throughout my career, I was using the lecture method. A certain amount of technology, I've never been frightened of the technology, but it was the lecture method. From what I can tell over the last decades that I've been teaching is that the classroom itself is fragmenting. Once upon a time when I lectured, there was a quintessential student out there, a person that I spoke to. That was the level of language I used, that was the amount of detail I used. Doesn't suffice anymore. The classroom is fragmenting in terms of student needs, how they learn, all the rest of it. We've got accommodation students, we've got international students, we've got students who have jobs and can only come to part of the class. We've got students who are single parent students and have to get home and pick their kids up. Lots and lots of different, the expectation is that they will be accommodated, their lifestyle will be accommodated. So I'm not talking to one student anymore. I'm talking to a whole bunch of students. This is why I look to the technology to help me do that. Secondly, I'm interested in where the technology is leading education. One of the other courses that I teach is called the History of Western Technology and Social Values. So I'm kind of interested to see exactly what kind of an impact it will have. Not my first revolution, I've gone through a few of them. Will this one stick? Where is it going? What, how will it change education? And the third reason, as you can, I think I put it up there, or I may not put it up there, was cell phones. The bane of my existence. I mean, so instead of saying, put your cell phones away, I looked forward to a flipped classroom where I could say, take your cell phones out. Didn't quite solve the problem, as you'll see, but at least I wanted to meet the students in cyberspace and see if I could actually connect with them. So those were the reasons primarily that I decided to try this experiment with the flipped classroom.
And just as Howard had reiterated a little bit about changing his teaching approach, essentially in my department, we meet with faculty and we work on any solutions that they say, I want to try this particular pedagogy out, or I want to use these particular technologies. We always say, well, if you want to use technology, we have to find the appropriate pedagogy, because we're not just going to use tech for tech's sake. There always has to be some type of outcome attached to that. So we really went with an active learning approach that was informed by a few other frameworks, like technology obviously enabled learning, and social constructivist theory. So I really, we met, we decided that we should have a very peer-to-peer, discussion-oriented classroom to serve the flipped model that we're using, because this is actually a history course. So we have to talk experientially, how does what happened in 1950 relate and contribute to your life today? And do you see a pattern in that, in what we are currently experiencing? And just to speak a little bit to the development time, because this is a question we often get when someone's working with designers and developers, how long does it actually take to create a course? That is a course that is full of infographics, other visual materials, interactives that students can, play with, click around, games. Typically, it takes 2 semesters, I would say. For our particular course, it took about 1 semester of development time, and Howard had started in on the development in the summer. So sometimes it's rare to actually have faculty who are really active in creating their videos and their content in that way, but he was very eager to actually be involved in that. Okay, so I just want to go over the reasons why we love this course. So we had 6 modules for 14 weeks. So approximately 2 modules a week, give or take, depending on how the flow of the class was. All of the modules, so all of these weeks were chunked into subtopics so that the student could go in and have, we talk a lot about just-in-time learning. This course is based on micro-learning, so they could go in, and if they wanted to be informed of one particular concept, they could go in, and in 6 minutes, they would have an idea of what Howard wanted to get from them for, for that day or for a component of that week. So Howard, I think you're going to speak a little bit to the peer-to-peer that you had in class.
Well, the idea was, here's a 3-hour course, or 3 hours a week. I put my lectures online, Blackboard, and I give them 1 hour for viewing and reviewing the lectures. Now, tried to keep the lectures as short as possible. 6 minutes was my guideline. Often went over that, unfortunately. The idea then is students view these sometime before the class, come in, and broken into groups. Well, I'll probably give a little mini lecture just to highlight some of the things. Broken into groups, they then address some of the issues that are brought up in the lectures themselves, right? If they need to research more, they go online and take a look and find relevant information, right? It also, let me just say one word about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. The technology certainly gives you the flexibility so that you can accommodate almost any student. Ultimately, what you want is a seamless course so that you don't have to identify any special needs. Everybody comes in and it's all there. And certainly the technology and this format allowed for that. That is, I could give as much time as I wanted to tests, because they did the tests all in the assessment center. So typically 40 multiple choice question test takes 20 minutes, half an hour. They would have easily an hour for it, and they'd have a whole week in which to do it. So accommodation in class assignments, the same kind of thing. I could give them time to do that. Yeah, and having the video on there, they would not only could they see the video, but I put the transcripts there as well and the slides. So if they couldn't hear, they've got it right there in front of them and they can go through it. So the technology certainly helped all of that, the Universal Design for Learning.
Yeah, and definitely just to speak to that a little bit, because I've worked a lot in just with accessibility services. The fact that you're also providing a Word document transcript when you're reading on a screen reader or something like JAWS, that actually makes a student's life so much easier, that they're not going in, because even though screen readers have a hard time reading the learning management system, and they have a hard time reading the PowerPoint slides. So that Word document definitely made the world to some of those students. And in addition to that, we've obviously spoken about how this was very multimedia oriented. So, a student could go in, view infographics, videos, other interactions, and they'd also have those lecture notes and the transcript of everything. And we also made sure that it was mobile friendly. Okay, so I could go onto my cell phone, I would have the Blackboard mobile app, which we know at George Brown College, when I run the analytics reports, on average, just for the month of March, we had 32,000 logins a day, and that's significant. At semester startup in September, we usually are around 82 to 84,000 logins on the first day of class. So we know that our faculty and our students are using mobile frequently. It's not used in this course. Later on, we did, some studies with some data. We know that it's not their primary device, but it's definitely a device they're getting their secondary information from. Okay. All right, so we've already kind of just described the methodologies that we use. We obviously flipped the classroom, used UDL, active learning principles. We really did leverage the capabilities of our learning management system. We are on Blackboard, so within Blackboard itself, we used a lot of the collaborative tools that were provided, from the video content that they have to the discussion boards, etc., the announcements. We also use their course reporting. So Blackboard does have its own course level analytics reports. I would say that as far as institutional analytics, it's not as robust, but as a teacher, you can still go into your course and figure out, okay, why are all my students logging in at Tuesday at 6 p.m. and no other time during the week? So it's really great for reflective practice. We're also able to see, okay, why are students avoiding this piece of content? Why is nobody looking at it? And that's something that you can actually address with them in class. Okay?
Still a couple of things I want to say here.
Okay.
So the student teacher, I had two classes. One of the classes was Wednesday afternoon from 3 till 5, and the other 3 till 6. The other one was Friday. I also had a class Wednesday morning. So Wednesday afternoon I taught this. Wednesday morning I taught the other one, was traditional lecture style. In the morning I didn't know, and then we're talking about a class of about 50 to 60 students, depending. Morning I did not know anybody's name in the class. In the afternoon I could name about a dozen people. That's a big, big change for me. I mean, it means that I've gotten involved with the students in a way that I had never gotten involved with before. The other point I would like to make, though, is the peer-to-peer discussion. Because it was a general education elective, it meant that students were coming from many different programs, you know, culinary, business, community services, et cetera, et cetera. They had a much more difficult time getting comfortable because they didn't know one another. So the group work, I had to sort of encourage them to participate in the groups. When they formed groups, for instance, to do group presentations, again, it was, gee, I'd like to be with my friends. Well, maybe you should make new friends. That kind of an attitude. It presented somewhat of a problem.
Yeah, but on the same token, as far as knowing what the climate was at the get-go from the class, we were able to say, okay, if we're having presentations and everyone is going to have a specific role or responsibility, that was outlined, and then each of the students could decide within the group who wanted that role and responsibility. So that was a way that we were able, one strategy to mitigate, you know, dispersing all of that information on the students. So next up is just our outcomes. So we did survey the class and look at the analytics that the course reporting that we were able to get in Blackboard. So we had about 120 students and a very good turnout for the surveys. So essentially what we did realize, and this is just for us, this is a practitioner presentation, so we're not sure what we really want to do with this data. We obviously are going to, this class is going to be taught again, so this will inform our next approach. But we know that the majority of our students were under the age of 24, hence, you know, why we were so mobile centric. Not saying that any of our students, we know that our students who were, you know, 35 and older also preferred mobile. So the implications of that we still have to dissect a little bit more. But we know that just a little bit over 50% of our students were ESL learners. And a portion of those students were coming to Canada just to study at George Brown College. So that obviously is going to inform the way that Howard is going to pace the class and the way that the students are going to interact with one another. Other things that were interesting, 63% of the students use laptops, 17% used their smartphones as the primary device, but we did find out in other data that they were using their smartphones heavier for their secondary device to kind of recheck their notes on the subway, et cetera, things like that. We also know what was really interesting is that 60% of the students had never experienced a flipped classroom, and that 72% of the students at the end of the course would like to have a flipped classroom again. So we look at that number as being relatively generous for first-time students experiencing this. And 91%, which I was happy about, said they did like the design in Blackboard, the way that we made it very, very easy to navigate.
Now, if you take a look at that, Amina and I have talked about this.
We're laughing at these ones.
And that is that they do tend to turn on the lectures as they're coming into class. This is not the idea of a flipped classroom.
Yeah.
And it's a problem that I'm going to have to solve. Number of different suggestions. One is to actually give them a test that they have, you know, half a dozen questions that they have to get perfect on. In other words, they can't just sort of, you know, put all C's down. They'll actually have to get 100% on it at least the night before, and then it'll shut off, so that it means that they have actually looked at all the lecture material. That's the one I'm sort of toying with right now.
Right, so it's just trying to find a way to incentivize making sure that they watch the materials on time. And obviously we did design this course to be just in time so that it would be accessible to students you know, who couldn't watch the notes, who were busy, you know, the child was sick. So we do take that into account when we were creating this course. Or if they didn't, that's true. But we can see here, I mean, obviously, it's a little staggering, like we know that this was Wednesday's, the class was on Wednesday,
Yes,
and Wednesday was our peak in time, and this was actually peak here as well of when they were accessing, but we can see that they were at least logging in earlier on in the morning and doing the work for that particular day. So that was nice to see.
Why it's important, of course, is that the group discussions don't really have any substance to them unless they've taken a look at the lecture material. They'll just come and exchange pleasantries. I mean, which is not something that I would like.
Okay. So at the end of the day, as I said, this was our first go-round, first development, first time teaching this particular course, and for Howard, this particular model. So we did realize, and this concept's been reiterated quite a bit. It's something that I definitely believe. Technology can humanize the classroom. So we used it to bring students together who otherwise would have never crossed paths. Have a conversation with your neighbor, get to know their perspective on the content that it was up for discussion.
Probably one of the things that impressed me the most was working with Amina, because you've got a baby boomer and a millennial, and we certainly don't talk the same language, and we've had, I think, trying to understand each other has been actually quite a learning experience for me. Like I say, it's a learning experience.
Yeah. So I think, Howard, we have down, the students will still be distracted by their smartphones, even if leveraged for learning activities. So that's not something that I want to be complacent about, but I'm saying, what can we do about it? What other strategies? So it's making me think differently about how we can deliver curriculum, definitely. So, Howard, speak to the last point.
I asked her whether he was waiting for a train or about to jump, and I'm sort of in that position.
No, so a lot of time dedicated to classroom management he found instead of like research and development that he would otherwise be doing, essentially. So
yeah, that was, I think that was an important one. A lot of the energy and the time goes into class management, getting people into groups, trying to get them to solve problems with whatever device they're using, et cetera, as opposed to actually putting a lot of the time, which I like to do, putting a lot of time into the research and the presentation of the actual material, and that was a concern that I had.
Yeah, and essentially this kind of goes with sort of the theme of the conference. I think yesterday, I forget who was speaking, but they were talking about how the role of the professor is changing. That the professor is now, rather than just the purveyor of all of the knowledge, they are curating the knowledge and the content, and they are facilitating that more than ever. So that's definitely something that I guess we learned along this journey. So thank you.
Let me first introduce very quickly our panelists. Anne, Jeffrey, Craig, and Aga. And you will hear a little bit more about us as we speak about the usage of mindfulness in education and be focusing on, very generally, on the use of technology to increase the impact of mindfulness in blended learning. So obviously, we seem to be getting ready. I'm going to ask you to actually take a deep breath for yourself first. And now one deeper one, inhaling, counting to 4. And exhaling, counting to 6. Make sure to relax your shoulders, your facial muscles, and join us in this conversation. Thank you for coming. There are quite a number of definitions of mindfulness in literature and in research, and I'm talking about evidence-based definitions, but we've distilled a working definition just for this session today, and that's that mindfulness is the art of paying attention on purpose. I do admit we simplified the definition. As we were going through research on mindfulness, neuroscience, use of mindfulness in technology, use of mindfulness in education, we've come through proof and discussion on how the use of mindfulness actually helps in reducing stress, lowering anxiety, depression, increasing attention, helping with building the attention muscle. That's everywhere, right? And better regulate your emotions, your interpersonal relationships, as well as increasing levels of kindness and compassion. And that's not only in an educational context, but also within a everyday life context. And I think it's very important for us to remember that it's not like we check in our humanity at the door when we walk into our classroom in an educational situation. All of us, teachers and learners, are humans, and that's what we bring to the table. Therefore, we very carefully look at the importance of mindful practice, and mindful practice not only in the sense of sitting on your cushion, meditating, but actually mindful practice in everything you do, in the way you approach people, in the way you make decisions about your teaching, about your learning, about accommodating your students' needs. We will be sharing this PowerPoint with you. These are some of many recently published papers on the effects of mindfulness in education, and these are all clickable. So once again, you see the repeat of similar themes. And just tying back to our keynote speaker today, I wanted to share with you two facts to wake you up from that state of mindfulness and realize that when we use technology in our life and in our teaching and learning, we do have to face certain threats, challenges, and limitations that same tool, technology, that could also help us with overcoming these barriers. It brings those challenges onto us. So these numbers speak for themselves. Now, I should mention, you see all the ... I had approximately 150 facts like that. I just decided to, not stress you too much and share only the top from my list. So for those of you in the last row that are not able to read very quickly, the average person checks their device, that is a mobile device, 85 times a day with a total of 5 hours browsing the web and using apps, around a third of your life. Wow. Okay? I'm cheating a little bit. Person's waking time, so that's not enough. Okay. And then that is a very conservative number. Other statistics were telling us that the number is higher, with users checking their phone on average more than 150 times a day. Mindfulness actually helps with our emotion regulation. Emotion is central to cognition, therefore it is central to teaching and learning. And if you cannot read here, I'm blushing. Well, that was amazing. That's a brain. Yeah, we should do that more often. That's a heart. And now, more discussion later. But before you ask questions and we answer them mindfully, I'd like to invite Jeff to speak to us about your particular mindfulness and education context.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm not certain if you have a chance to pass out these cards.
I shall do it right now.
Okay, great. So I'll give you a brief little context about myself. I'm hearing a little echo when I speak, so I hope it sounds good on your end.
We are good.
Okay, great. I did a PhD in the area of mindfulness and education at Boise UT in 2007, and at that point it didn't exist, the field of mindfulness and education. It was really just getting started, and I was focused on developing a program for teachers, teachers in training. And that was an in-person training, and I ran that course at Boise for teachers, teacher in service, and I did research on that course, and it was really effective, and we've heard some of the benefits of this and how it supports learning. And then I started to see some of the barriers to in-person training in mindfulness around logistics, around finances, and getting it out there. You know, teachers are really busy people. In the workplace, people are really, they're very busy people. It's hard to get people to come into the same spot. And so we developed an online program and using more of a blended approach now when we offer mindfulness training. And we're currently offering mindfulness training through my organization called MindWellU, and we offer it to teachers. We work with organizations like Coca-Cola, WestJet, with healthcare authorities, so hospitals, healthcare workers, as well as even high schools. Now we're working with a high school where we offer our program, which is the 30-day mindfulness challenge. And we offer it to students, staff, and faculty, or students, staff, and parents in the context of a high school. And so the 30-day challenge is a 30-day program. It's online, and it starts all together on one day, and then you can access it through your phone or through a tablet or a computer. And it's all designed to give you some content around mindfulness. Our content is very condensed and short and sharp. It's about 2 minutes. We use videos, infographics, and then we also teach you one core practice, which is Take 5, which you see on one side of your card here. And we call this a mindfulness in action practice. And so this practice you can do in the midst of your day. You don't need to be on the cushion for an extended period. It's really trying to teach people how to integrate mindfulness into their life in a very fluid way. And in my last moment or two, I'm just going to talk about the evidence that we've found, which is the back of the card. And that shows a study that we partnered with the Sauder School of Business at UBC. We did a big study last year across 5 organizations, close to 1,000 people who went through our 30-day mindfulness challenge. And some of the outcomes that we saw were around well-being, emotion regulation, which we heard about, resilience, optimism, which are really important, workplace energy, authenticity, and the willingness to go above and beyond. And that talks about both, like in the workplace, when you're willing to go above and beyond and help your colleagues. The bottom half of that card talks about some of the stats that we've received from over 7,500 people who have taken the challenge in just over a year, which is really exciting to me. I was teaching mindfulness for maybe 15 years in person, and there's no way I touched that many people. So within a year, we've had over 7,000 people go through our training, which is really meeting the mission of MindWellU, which is to help make mindfulness more relevant and accessible for more people. And so the bottom statistics there are talking about what people rated, how the challenge affected their communication, health and well-being, leadership, stress reduction, and we're seeing across the board a very high numbers of people who are agreeing. So I've got 40 seconds left, and I think that was really my key message that I wanted to share with you. I think it's a very interesting topic to start to think about how to teach mindfulness mindfully using technology, because technology might be this thing that's actually making us mindless. Yes. Because it's frying our brain systems and our systems of attention and emotion regulation. And in order to be sensitive to that, that's why we've really tried to make our training short and sharp. We're not trying to make people wed to our platform. We're actually trying to teach a practice of Take 5, which they can guide themselves through in the midst of their day, rather than having to come plug in and sit down and listen to it. So we're trying to empower people to practice Take 5 in their life.
Oh, that was mindful.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And Craig, I would invite you now to further elaborate on the usage of technology. Do put your stopwatch on.
Thank you very much. Jeff's obviously a hard act to follow just because of the amazing applications that he's done. I'm on the mental health side of things. And what we're seeing is a large uptake and need for accessibility, one of the themes that I'm sure is core to this conference. So much of the research funding actually now is focused on how do we get these tools out into the world. So I just wanted to share that, you know, the accessibility question is incredibly important. And the reason I share that with you folks in this room is because I know you are all, you work in a synergy environment, right, where you're taking principles and you're using technology to enhance those principles in the education environment. So it's also a plea to, you know, take what you know now through this talk and other exposure to mindfulness and to begin to think about how we can increase the accessibility to it, to the practices. So that's sort of my first kind of core message. On the mental health and education field, I educate folks in an adult education environment at U of T through the certificate program in applied mindfulness studies. And we see people from across spectrums, right? It's adult education, it's continuing studies, whether in the corporate world, the education world, the health world, etc., or their own personal development. And the course that I emphasize or I teach and I've designed is the ethics or embodied applied practices of mindfulness. So it takes this idea of cultivating attention, right? The art and science of cultivating attention. And we focus on, in this course, the on-purpose part. So what are the values that we cultivate when we're teaching, when we're sitting with folks? What is the motivation and intention? And I think these are all incredibly important questions for anyone working in the helping sector, the change sector, but especially the education sector. So just to put a fine point on the definition and the sort of application of mindfulness is it's not what we're teaching, it's how we're teaching. And, you know, many teachers do not need some other curriculum element to teach, right? But what we can use mindfulness to do is to focus on the how and the mindset and cultivating our own practices that will increase our intentional learning outcomes. So that's just a little nuance that I wanted to share with you folks, is that when you are becoming more intentional and you are bringing awareness and attention to how you can create a better learning environment, you're practicing mindfulness. So you're probably doing it already, but I also just wanted to encourage you to keep doing that. Some other challenges that we're seeing in the mindfulness field, Jeff touched on a few of those, are around uptake. Now, if you have an iPhone 6, you actually already have embedded in your platform a mindfulness corner. If you open it up and you look at the health button, there is the health app. There's a mindfulness option that comes up, and it's already there. So the reason I bring that up is, have you ever done that, Jeff?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so it's there, and most people haven't. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, so if you have an iPhone and you open it up and you click on the health app, there's a mindfulness option. And where I think that's really neat, and to the point that Aga made, and to the point, you know, to the wonderful products and applications that Jeff and his company have developed, is that we need to be thinking about when we're doing these types of practices, what people are already doing. And so a lot of the blended applications are how do we get people to simply map something onto a behavior that's already taking place. And so we've seen mindful eating, we've seen mindful anxiety management, and we're almost done good. So we've seen lots of applications that map this on in a blended environment so that we can take the practices in person and map them onto what people are already doing. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there, and I really would encourage folks to keep exploring those opportunities as they come up. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Craig. And we will come back to you with questions.
Great.
And Anne, I'd like you to, well, I guess, situate all of what's been said so far, or elaborate on it in a more classroom or blended learning environment.
I take the challenge, Aga. So thank you very much. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to present here because for those of you who don't know me, I am faculty here at George Brown, but right now I'm non-teaching faculty. So I'm a curriculum specialist, and I consider myself a faculty developer, curriculum developer. And I don't work at this campus, so I was so excited just in the 2 minutes walking here. What's this I see? Lizelle, can you put up your hand? This lovely lady, Lizelle Tucci. Mindset and meditation, waterfront room. Don't you just want to go? Just from this picture alone, I was so excited. And then look at this one, breathing campaign every Tuesday. De-stressing is just a breath away. And then I actually brought some more if people want these, but you can use photocopy them using your class. Why yoga and a couple of de-stressing poses. And Beginner's Guide to Mindful Meditation. So I'll just leave these up here. But again, I think what's so exciting from my point of view is that as we talk about this, it's taking a personal practice kind of off the mat and into the world. And from my point of view, if we use Aga's definition about the art and practice of paying attention, and I would say to you, okay, how many of you feel burdened by this? Okay, the weapons of mass distraction in your classroom. So Aga at the beginning said, okay, people are checking their phones 85 times in 5 hours. How many of you as faculty feel like that's happening in your classroom? In the first 10 minutes, it's like 85 times, right? So what I do is kind of creative problem solving in working with faculty and saying, okay, this is the problem. You feel like you're up against the weapons of mass distraction. Your students have their phones out. They're not paying attention. So if I said to you, I'm going to help you have your students pay attention, how many of you would jump on board with me? Okay, a few people. All right, I'm going to help you get your students to focus on your material. How many people would take up that invitation? Oh, okay, like that. So some of the success that I've had in curriculum design is looking at the flipped classroom. And how many people are familiar with the flipped classroom? Okay, great. Anybody using the flipped classroom? Okay, yeah, so sort of. So the success that we've had is really faculty come to me and they say, Anne, I've got so much content that 3 hours just isn't enough. And I say, okay, well, less is more. Could we move some of that content outside of your classroom and in the classroom have the students paying attention to their own experience and really coming from a point of working with the material? So I think it's really hard, and everything that we know about teaching and learning research is that if students' first contact with the material happens in your class, that's really difficult. So moving it outside of the classroom, that kind of jargon, that vocabulary that they can use and watch a video, take a quiz, those kinds of things, really helps them to interact and pay attention in your classroom. So even though you're not necessarily doing mindful education, for me, I think it does form this body of how we're looking at what we're doing in the classroom. So that's something that I invite you to think about is what are your students doing in your classroom? So often as faculty, it's really easy for us to say, okay, so I'm prepping my lesson and this is what I'm doing for 3 hours. What are your students doing in the classroom during that time? So there's really interesting research that says we're able to speak about 150 to 200 words a minute, but we're able to think 600 words a minute. Is that an aha moment for maybe what's going on in your classroom? So by getting the students to pay attention, by working with your content inside the classroom, you're seeing those increased levels of awareness, of paying attention, of focus, and maybe most importantly, retention of material. So that's just a way that I like to present something that I find, mindfulness practice, that you may be doing already or you may be thinking about wanting to do. And I invite you to think about working with a curriculum specialist, a little plug there for myself, and and just thinking, you know, just because I'm faculty doesn't mean I have to know everything and know how to do all these things myself. You have supports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Impressive. Thank you very much, Anne. Just a comment from, again, an observation from my educational context. I'm an online teacher. I work for Athabasca University and I teach graduate courses in education. I work with educators. I work with teachers and instructional designers mainly from North America, but from representing various cultures, that's for sure. And I did a little bit of an experiment. Just 2 semesters ago, for the first time, I asked for permission to pilot a mindfulness in education project in my classroom, and just to make it very short, I introduced certain mindfulness strategies in the classroom, quite a number of them. We can discuss it outside of this panel. But what I did, what's very important, the most important observation was that the mindfulness strategies such as listening mindfully online, speaking mindfully online, participating in online discussions in a mindful way, have actually, that's anecdotal so far, okay, only so for now, really resulted in those teachers who were learners in my classroom being, you know, achieving a higher level of satisfaction in both their roles. So they will go outside of my classroom into their working environment, come back and report back on their aha moments. That's what they were doing. And they actually, within the 13 weeks of the course, they would come back and report on what you would label as success. Now, very important fact. I said to them, this is absolutely optional. I'm going to offer you additional synchronous sessions on mindfulness, as well as additional discussion forum in Moodle on mindfulness. You don't have to come. You have to come to the other sessions, but you don't really have to come to these. You know what happened? All the students, 100% of my students, were coming to absolutely all the mindfulness-related events. And what I want you to say, I had to ask them, what's going on? Why are you so interested in this topic? I know it's somewhat trendy nowadays, okay, but there's a much higher reason than that. And that's when they opened up, teachers representing various backgrounds. They all said, we need help. We need help. We are stressed out, overworked, undervalued, burnt out, and we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of everybody else. So I think I will just end on this note. I think what we are pointing to is that we are offering tools. We've practiced them. I'm a practitioner of over a decade of mindfulness, right? There are so many different methods, some of them mentioned. But there is a true need in every aspect of life. And the group of us here, if you want to have this discussion, we can guide you, point you the right direction. We can tell you about all the challenges and, you know, share our toolbox with you. Time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have a big challenge. I work with school districts across the country. And one of my school districts is San Bernardino, that had several shootings. We have, in the United States, of course, we've got all of these school shootings. We're dealing with students who are highly traumatized, who come from communities that are riddled with violence. And then we have teachers that are experiencing secondary trauma as a result of the students that they deal with. So then how do we take these practices to help these students and these teachers in a way that's really going to make a difference? Because you're right, they need help, they're crying for it. And the school districts that I work with, we're trying to figure out, for example, how to provide a forum for our grantees on mindfulness so that they can get the kind of help that they need. So can you help me with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a question for Jeff and Craig. Craig, maybe?
Sure.
Or Jeff,
Do you want to both go at that one, Craig? I can start and
sure. I actually have a very general comment, and actually you may have some more specifics, but we're often looking for the best, most effective way to bring mindfulness in, and there is no, because each context is different. And what I would very simply say is any practice. We know there are impacts of these practices. There's different ways of doing them. We have to understand the impacts of each of the different practices and models and suss them out. What is the most effective for this context? But from my general response is any application, whether it's with teachers, whether it's kids, whether it's built into the curriculum, is going to have some benefit. So that's the question to start with, is what's the most immediate impact that we can have? The simplest way, we can get into a trap of like, what's the big overarching best way? Any way is going to be positive from my perspective, as long as we put a little intention and consideration into it.
And I would add to that, I agree that there's multiple ways, and mindfulness isn't about having one kind of training. That's more of a lifelong learning. And to build off of what Anne was saying in the flipped classroom, is one of the biggest barriers in education is there's no time to teach this type of curriculum. It doesn't fit within like a specific classroom, and you don't have teachers that are trained to do it. And that's one of the reasons why we went to an online model, and one of the things we're experimenting with right now with different schools is making our offline training available for students, staff, and parents all at the same time, whereas it doesn't take time out of the classroom. They can do it on their own. It's all learning that's done on their own time, 5 minutes a day, but then they can come back and they can be reinforced through the classroom. So that's what I like about, this is obviously a plug for the work that I'm doing, but I think looking for models like that, where you can offer a curriculum that's somewhat engaging, that they can do on their own in relatively short amount of time, that the students, the teachers, and the parents can all do it, the same curriculum, and then they are built in this literacy of mindfulness and skills of mindfulness that they can share and be reinforced both at home and at school.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Actually, I can point you to some of the solutions that I've read about and I've spoken about in the United States. There are a couple of groups. I was at a conference called Wisdom 2.0. You might have heard about it. And I actually went into a couple of sessions where similar scenarios were presented and examples of solutions to them discussed. So I can offer that much, that I'll point you to actual names of presenters that were discussing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this space with us today. And thank you, gentlemen online.
Break is over. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we will share with you a method that we follow to create a hybrid course based on stories. My name is Liz Romero, and I am an instructional designer here at George Brown College.
And I'm Sue Fleming, and I teach baking theory and also cost control at the chef school at George Brown.
I'm Chin Leung. I am the instructional developer in the e-learning department at George Brown College.
You're in charge. Okay, so for today, first we will provide the background information about the course. It was a cost control course in bakery. Then we will talk a bit about the advantages of a hybrid learning, explain the model that we follow. Then Chili will talk about the storylines that we created, and we will show some preliminary results that we got when Sue taught this course for the first time. And at the end, we will share a checklist for success.
So I teach, as I said, all the theoretical courses in the baking pastry arts department and cost control, etc. And because we teach such a wide range of skills at George Brown, it's really important that we send our students out into the industry, that they graduate with the skills that they need to be successful. In my case, they need to be able to run a successful patisserie, because otherwise they're going to end up living in their parents' basement, and that's not really an option.
Okay, so when we first were assigned to this project, we were actually pleased to know that this was going to be a hybrid course, with certain portion of the course taught face-to-face in a classroom setting, and another portion of the course through online technologies. So it has been documented that the hybrid learning is a preferred modality for students. It's a midway between the structure of the classroom and the freedom of an online component. It's convenient because students can access the online component anytime, anywhere, and they actually have face-to-face classes where they can talk about that face-to-face online component. It also empowers teaching and learning. Teachers can take more risk when a course is taught in a hybrid mode. They can develop challenging online components because they know that they will have face-to-face time to solve any problems, issues, and concerns that students might have with the online component. Okay, so this is the model that we follow to create the course. The first component of the model is to identify needs. As a team, we needed to know about the course. Who are the students for this course? About the content. So what are the characteristics of the content? We also need to get to know the content matter expert and see what risk we could take with this course. The second, so then in one of the first meetings, we found out that students usually struggle to pass this course. And they struggle in the application of concepts. And we also found out that why the hybrid course, because there were so many students, they couldn't afford the time in the classroom. They needed to decrease the numbers of hours in the classroom.
The contact hours.
The contact, right. So with that information in mind, students are having a hard time applying cost control concept in real life situations. So we started to brainstorm solutions. And we came up with stories. We realized that we needed to teach those hard to grasp concepts through stories. Why stories? Stories have been with us for thousands of years. And human beings seem to have a natural way to make sense of the world around them through stories. And we all like to listen to stories. And we get engaged when we listen to stories. So we decided to create a main story to introduce the course, to raise the level of confidence of students. Tell the students, well, this course is fun. This course has these components, and to motivate them to look forward to the different components of the course. So we developed the stories, and we developed the stories, and then we went through a process of revising the online components among ourselves. We identified areas that needed to be improved, and we worked on those areas. So by September 2016, the course was taught for the first time, and we collected some preliminary evaluation data about how effective was the course to teach those concepts that were hard for the students to grasp.
So I know the information that I have to teach in cost control. I know that it's really dry. I know that it's really technical. There's a lot of math. And the students who are in the Baking and Pastry Arts program are usually there because they are creative. They tend to be pretty math phobic. So how do we get them on board with what we're trying to do? And as Liz said, the stories, that's sort of a natural kind of extension to be able to draw them in. It makes the subject matter accessible, it helps make it memorable, and it also allows students to connect with it and understand some really dense material. with a bit of humor. It sort of motivates the student to engage, to work their way through the online content, because there is a tendency among students when there's just online content to go, hey, that's one class I don't really have to do. So with this method of storytelling, it really sort of gets the students to engage. I use storytelling techniques in my face-to-face classes, and it really translates perfectly to an online environment. So for example, if you switch to the things, if you look at these topics, I mean, they're brutal. It makes my eyes glaze over, and I'm teaching it. Imagine being 19 and listening to some old bag go on and on for 2 hours talking about, the planned costs and historical, I mean, it's horrible. So we started off with a story, and that introduced the concepts to the students, and it sort of let them know what was going to be discussed in the course, using familiar, relatable scenarios, like wanting to open up a patisserie. And through that, we were able to give examples of what each of these costs were, and we could weave the definitions through the storyline. And so through the story, they realized that they actually understand quite a bit about this material, because it's stuff that's familiar, opening a patisserie, buying, selling, stock and inventory and so on. It engages the students, and it also at the same time demystifies some of the really dry terminology.
I need to mention that we first created an overall story, and then we extracted those concepts that students were having trouble with and created small story to show the application of those contents in real life settings.
So I guess we were talking about the story. So as we know, in the story, we have like beginning, character, problem, or plot, and then we finally have a solution. So in a character, we picked Sue as like a role model in the class. She successfully have a story to tell to the students, so it gives them like confident about this teacher. It also give a confidence about the small stories that we're going to introduce later on. So at the beginning, we have like a main story to cover what they're going to learn for the whole course. I'm going to show you very quickly.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, old Chef Fleming opened a patisserie. It was to be her pride and joy, a chic pastry shop with a little cafe attached, where customers could have elegant lunches and cocktails while waiting for their cake orders to be boxed. But what a learning curve! First, she had to learn about all the different types of costs. Who knew there was more than one type?
If you know more, you can ask Sue about that.
And I can bore you to death with it.
So as we go along, as you can see, there's so many different costs that we are trying to cover. So we have mini story along the course that we talk about every single element in there. But we didn't actually build every single one as an animation because it takes time, it's a development. So in class, and even though in the course, we have stories that Sue tells in the different formats.
Yeah, stories like, for example, the importance of keeping inventory in a restaurant. And in a restaurant I worked in, we kept being short on strip loins. Nobody knew why until one Friday night, the guy who played Friday night hockey with his buddies was taking his hockey bag out, and somebody said, "Oh, what kind of equipment do you have, man?" Opened his bag, and it was full of strip loins. So if we didn't keep inventory, we would never have known that they were missing. So little stories like that.
So a little story like this, you can easily cover, not easily, but easier to cover in a course, even though in a text format. But something is more complex, like cost control, we kind of like break it down further so that we'll show it in the animation. So this is another example that we did.
Now, one of our employees has a little wedding cake business on the side. And with the wedding season coming in June, she asked if she could order some cake fondant through us. We pay the wholesale price, which is cheaper, and she pays us back. This is what's called a steward sail. This is subtractive.
So in this example, we can even tell, even though within a bigger concept, we also have a little story within each animation. So the last one I'm going to show is the breakdown. So this is even something that students are having a harder idea to get around. So we actually break it down even further. So the whole animation is actually a 5 minutes animation, but we're only showing a certain part of it right now.
For each lemon cake that she makes, she needs 9 lemons, 6 eggs, 200 mils of cream, 300 grams of flour, and 320 grams of sugar. She also needs a box because nobody's going to carry a cake home in their pocket. She needs a label for the box, and she figures that she needs 1 sample per sale in order to get people to buy it. Now Hannah also realizes that this is just way too much work for her by herself. So she ropes in her kid sister. And she calculates that with the speed her sister works at, it's going to cost Hannah $2 for each cake that her sister makes.
So the reason we brought it down, break it down so closely, so the student will know that every single thing counts. So that's the idea behind to put in an animation.
So I did an informal feedback questionnaire. I had students fill out anonymous sheets, and I asked them to give me their honest reactions to the course, because it was the first time we were running it, and we needed to know how they had experienced it. They really liked the way the narrative clarified ideas for them. They liked the way that they could view the videos as many times as they needed to in order to really understand the concepts. And the fact that the course was very interactive, even the online content, and humorous as well, it made them, made working through that material much easier and much more enjoyable. But perhaps most importantly, the stories helped them understand why they needed to know this material. They could actually see the practicality of the information that the course was offering.
Okay, so we consider this course a successful course, and we think that to create one of these courses, we first need to identify what is needed. We need to know information about the content, about the learners, about what are learners going to do in real life as a result of this course. We also, as a team, need to brainstorm the ideas. There might be many solutions, so we need to brainstorm ideas and look for the best solution. Focus in the outcomes. The stories that we created were directly related to the outcome of the course. Then create the storylines. For the storylines, we use the shells that we saw in the previous slide to break down the stories. And then revise and evaluate. And actually, a main ingredient for this type of model is the content expert. Behind every great course, there is a great content expert. And in that first component of the model, where we analyze the needs, we also get to know the content expert. We also get an idea of what path can we go. Can we take risks? Can we innovate? Can we get out of the box? We depend on that content expert. So the content experts need to be expert in the field of knowledge, need to know the learners, need to know the learning process, need to be experienced, and not only experienced, be reflective about their experience, and need to be open to new ideas, and need to be able to go that extra mile for the students. And all of that and more was what we found in Chef Sue Fleming.
And absolutely, to work with the two of you were things that I had never considered, never thought of. So the dream team.
Actually, when we first worked with Sue in the first meetings, Sue was asking, so how do I upload the PowerPoints in Blackboard? So she came with the idea of PowerPoints for students. And then we ended up with totally different course.
And it was awesome.
Perfect. Any questions?